So, good evening. Welcome to the July 24th Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. If we can have the roll call to start, please.
Commissioner Cribbs? Here. Commissioner Greenfield?
Here.
Commissioner Lemire?
Here.
Commissioner McCulley? Commissioner McDougall?
Here.
Commissioner Moss?
Here.
Commissioner Rechtel?
Here.
Councilman Scharf? Absent.
Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda? Are there any suggested changes or requests or deletions? Do we have any from the commissioners or from staff? If not, we'll go with oral communications. I have one card here from Monica Williams. Monica, if you will come forward.
Good evening, Chair McDougall and Commissioners.
Good evening.
I'm Monica Engel-Williams, President of the Silicon Valley Pickleball Club, and I'm representing 340 members to request that the policy for reserving tennis courts is updated to include pickleball players. We founded our nonprofit club in 2016 primarily to purchase insurance to allow us to reserve the tennis courts. Imagine our dismay when we discovered that this privilege was only for USTA and the Palo Alto Tennis Club. Our first appeal to you was 16 months ago, and to date, the policy remains the same. Please bear in mind that reservations generates revenue for the city. The current policy states, tennis courts are available for reservation for Palo Alto Tennis Club and USTA tournament use only. We're requesting an update to the policy that would add only 6 words and would read, tennis courts are available for reservation for Palo Alto Tennis Club, the USTA, and the Silicon Valley Pickleball Club, tournament use only. All other guidelines would stay the same. There would be no conflict with tennis reservations because we can be very flexible with the timing of our club tournaments, and forming an ad hoc committee or waiting until we have dedicated pickleball courts for this minor update is totally unnecessary. We're planning to hold a midweek tournament in August and would very much appreciate if the policy can be updated by then, because it's very difficult to hold a tournament on a drop-in basis. When the original policy was adopted in 2009, it was on condition that it would be reviewed periodically. It was reviewed and updated in 2012, but only for the field reservations, not for the tennis courts. Pickleball is no longer just for the senior community. 5.0 tennis players have joined us, and recently a 10-year-old boy, Jacob, who participated in our free youth pickleball clinic, is already competing with adults. Besides our city recreation classes that were full last session with 44 in the class and a waiting list, we teach for free anyone who drops by the courts and wants to learn. They do not have to be members of our club. We are all volunteers who want to share the joy of pickleball and help improve the health and wellness of our community. Our club includes almost 40% of Palo Alto residents, 4 of whom are on our board of directors, and we are requesting that you act without any further delay to update the tennis court reservation policy to include the Silicon Valley Pickleball Club. Thank you all for your service to our community and for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Monica, thank you for your presentation, and I would personally thank you for your perseverance.
Thank you.
If we have no other oral communications, I would invite the staff report.
Good evening, Darren Anderson with Open Space Parks and Golf. I've got a brief department report for you. We start with the Baylands Boardwalk project update. This is good news. As you probably remember, this one's fraught with challenges in obtaining permits because the work is happening directly in the salt marsh and subject to a number of reviews from environmental regulatory agencies. We've got all the permits. We issued the notice to proceed to Vortex Marine Construction on July 20th. They've since ordered the materials. There's an extended time period before getting the materials. Alaskan yellow cedar is the type of material they'll be using for most of the supports, and there's a delay in getting that. So they ordered right away as soon as they started. They couldn't start anyway to the end of nesting bird season, so they'll start construction in September, and complete the project by January 6th is the game plan. No work can happen after January 31st, 2019. That'll be the beginning of next bird nesting season. So I met with the contractor. We did a preliminary walkthrough. They're confident they can get the project done on time. The Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plans moving forward. I recently received some initial concept designs for the ITT area. I shared that with the ad hoc committee, and soon they'll be coming to the stakeholders and to the full commission. We come back with some updates. Likewise, got the initial maps that show the different sea level rise effects for the Baylands, and that went out to the ad hoc members, and we'll review that. It'll go to the stakeholders and likewise to the full commission for some review. But it's moving along. The Foothills Trail reroute, I'll be presenting more on this at the next commission meeting, but just the other day I was at an interdepartmental review committee. This is comprised of different members of various departments within the city, all with sort of vested interests and things. And they review your proposal, your permit, and point out different things, tree impacts. Some people had water concerns. There's one part of the rerouted trail that passes a very shallow drainage. And one issue that we are going to have to address is the report we reference an ephemeral drainage. Apparently that triggered some things we'll have to resolve. But all the other concerns have been mitigated. The proximity to trees have been mitigated. We've rerouted around as many as possible and have mitigations in place for those trees that will be affected. We've distanced our rerouted trail from the middens. These are the wood rat middens that are along that area, push them out the necessary distance to avoid impacts to those. So we're very close. The planner I'm working with is confident that we'll have our permit in time to start construction beginning of September, which again coincides with the end of the nesting bird season.
For that drainage, would it just be putting a small culvert or something through there?
Hard to say. It's such a shallow, I mean, it's the most shallow drainage you can possibly imagine. We have existing trail that crosses it without issue. I don't believe it will be one. Neither did the planner. It's more semantics and just making sure everyone's comfortable with it.
So this is not a big deal?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I have a conference call tomorrow with the department person who's responsible for that with our consultant. We'll try to work it out.
Okay, thank you.
The Foothills Park 7.7 acres area, just an update. We went to council with an informational report, both on Buckeye Creek and the 7.7 acre area. I want to keep this brief because I know we've got a full agenda, but I want to let you know I discussed with the ad hoc. So firstly, we informed council that we will be opening that area this summer. So that is the game plan. Met with the ad hoc and discussed kind of a game plan for how we're going to strategize how we do this. It's a little bit of a challenge in that having a lot of fanfare for a parcel where we haven't done any development. There's no amenities on that parcel. Feels a little uncomfortable to do a ribbon cutting to come into kind of a large open area with not much in it. But at the same time, we waited a very long time to get access to this parkland. It's not every day you get to open an area that's been fenced off for so many years. And so after talking with Kristen and the feedback from the ad hoc, we were thinking a low-key event, much like the opening for the dog park. A simple ribbon cutting, perhaps a tour of the exterior of the native plant nursery from Grassroots Ecology, and the rangers could walk you around the area. We've also completed some cleanup around the entrance. You might remember our shop, the maintenance shop, is right there at the entrance. We've done a number of cleanups there to make it look good. And now we're in the final stages of finding out the schedule for our fence contractor to come out and put in the necessary fencing. So we're very close. I'll keep the commission and the ad hoc advised as we have a date, but it's not yet scheduled. And I think I'll leave the department report at that.
Kristen?
And I'd like to add one thing, because I'm not sure if Monica will be staying for the whole meeting when we get to upcoming agendas, but at our August meeting, we'll be talking about pickleball and tennis at that meeting, and hopefully bringing a draft revised policy to that meeting. So just wanted to let everyone know.
Kristen, I'm really glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you during the department report when we could move forward on this whole thing, because it's been a while. Thank you. Thank you.
If there's no other department reports, on to regular business. David?
I wanted to get an update on magical bridge, do we do that now or do we do that at the end of the meeting?
Maybe I could just clarify, do you mean the Matadero Creek Bridge next to the Magical Bridge Playground? I can
Yes.
just give you a quick update that the progress is going well, anticipated completion for August 30th. And a side note, that old bridge was, we picked it up and brought it to the MSC. We're going to rehabilitate it. Perhaps, if it works this way, we could use it, for example, to connect the ITT area to Bixby.
One other thing, and that is that you were not here at the last meeting, but we did talk briefly about the golf course that opened very recently. How's that going?
Yeah, so far so well. We've gotten good feedback from the users. The greens are playing really well. It's so nice to see that parking lot full. The putting green is the one that's really obvious as you drive by. A lot of people enjoying the practice putting green, and revenues are on target.
Jeff?
And I just wanted to, we will have a more formal update in
Right.
August on that as well.
It looks like we have staff reports available at the meeting now, but based on some feedback we got at the last meeting, I just wanted to get clarification. Is that's something that we'll make sure happens and something's changed?
Yes, everything is at the table in the back of the chambers.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Also, I just wanted to make one comment. I'm not, probably doesn't really belong in the staff report so much, but I was dismayed to see the solar panels that had gone up on the fields at JLS. And I know this is a PAUSD jurisdiction, and I certainly support solar and other alternative energy uses and anything we can do to reduce our footprint. But putting panels on grass fields, granted, I have some skin in the game here as part of the soccer community, but it doesn't seem like the best location, and ideally I would hope that we could be aiming for rooftops or parking lots where the shade is actually going to do some service that the solar panels throw off. And I know we have, I understand the city has a minimal leverage here.
I share that concern. We saw the impacts and raised it to our contacts with POSD, and our rebuttals or concerns were not met with any change, unfortunately.
It's a reminder to me of our role here as stewards of parks and open spaces, and doing whatever we can to maintain these for our children and our children's children.
Is there an opportunity to do anything about it now, Darren, at all, or is it just a done thing? Does the city not still take care of the fields?
We perform maintenance on the
Yeah.
fields, yeah. No, I don't believe there's anything we could do to change what's now in the ground for the solar panels.
Can you put a fence around the base of them so that we could play soccer all the way up to the very base of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our concerns are more, I think that's possible. In fact, I think some of them might be tall enough that you could put a goal under them. At least that was what we were originally told. Some of it still is evolving. One concern we've got, in addition to it encroaching into the playing area, which is a problem, there's also the fact that you can't grow grass under a fully shaded area. And so that's another one we'll have to try to figure out.
Could we maybe put this on an agenda and maybe as a broader topic, not just that one field and that one solar panel installation, rather than continue here? I think that would be better if we came back to it when we had a chance to understand what the issues are and had a presentation or discussion on it. Would that be fair?
Sure, and I think with a little time, staff might have more information. Right now, I don't have a lot.
Right, thank you for that.
And can that go to the city school committee that we have?
I would work with the city manager's office to get that on their agenda. So, but the school is responsible for their capital projects. We don't have, we're not in control of what capital projects they do or don't do, even on their fields, because we're just doing maintenance.
I understand
So,
that,
yeah, so it's
but-
not, what I'm saying is that solar panels aren't the city's project.
I also think it could be useful for the liaison to the school board. Don't we have a PA-USD liaison role within the Parks and Rec Commission?
To the joint committee.
To the joint committee.
Right.
I would support making a statement on behalf of the
But,
Parks and Rec Commission.
So I'd like to, once again, suggest that we
Yeah, sorry.
hold off the discussion now, and then let's put together all the action plans and properly load our guns before we shoot.
Yep,
And-
let's get
and
on the
if we
agenda
could-
and we'll get back to this.
If we
Right.
could include in that discussion the solar panels that we were thinking of doing in the golf course parking lot as well, because that's open space too. And that's Parks and Rec.
So David, let me suggest that we'll find a way to collect all the things that should be included in that conversation. If there's no other discussion on the staff report, I assume everybody's read the minutes from the June 26 meeting, and I would entertain either changes, additions, or a motion to approve the minutes.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Thank you. We should vote on that, I guess. Yes. The next item on the agenda is a presentation by Jack Morton from the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation. And I'd like to welcome Jack. I'd like to, I believe everybody here probably knows Jack, and Jack has been very involved in the city for a long time as a council member. Jack, would you like to join us up at the desk here, or would you like to stand and present? Your choice, wherever you're more comfortable.
I'm fine. I'm okay here.
Okay.
I think.
Before Jack started, I would point out that he spent probably a lot more time sitting on this side of the bench than on that side, and has a very good reputation for that, and involved in the finance. And I would also like to point out that this is probably the only time in Palo Alto I'll ever have a chance to introduce somebody who's a fellow graduate of the University of Alberta. So.
Oh, these hidden honors.
With that horrendous.
These hidden honors. These hidden honors.
We welcome you here.
So my name's Jack Morton. I'm co-chair of the Recreation Foundation. And I do have a connection with Alberta, having grown up there and sort of ended up with a fondness for frozen water. You will understand that connection in just a minute. The Palo Alto Recreation Foundation was established December 15th, 1986, by a current member of the Parks and Recreation Commission who was unwilling to sit by and let the impact of Prop 13 destroy 80 years of celebrating May Day. That was one of the major concerns. Our sense of who we are is formed by those special things that we do together. So, and then special events director took heed of the support that the Children's Theater and the Children's Museum had, and saw no reason why recreation and community events should not have a similar nonprofit organization to preserve the recreational and social activities that made us special. I was probably asked to be a founding member because I had helped to ensure that the only outdoor ice skating rink west of the Sierra would not be bulldozed out of existence. Anne had a clear sense of what needed to be done, and it didn't take any of us more than a minute to accept Anne's offer to try to stem the elimination of activities and special events that began as soon as Prop 13 passed. We needed a funding source and decided on a community black and white ball to provide the funding that would do, and which would provide the needed funds to complement the reduced funding that the city budget made inevitable. Our goal as the Rec Foundation has been to keep the range of services that the city offered intact. We have spun off some things that we, if you want, incubated and preserved over the years, things like Chess Club, the Bay Run. Whenever we could get a partner to take over an activity, we saw it best for the community to have somebody like the Palo Alto news group to take on the Bay Runs. Then we can concentrate our efforts on what we can do, things like July 4th, chili cook-off, children's Halloween costumes, and that's one of the events that we've added in the last 5 years, the May Fate Parade. Funding is our perennial challenge. We do not have the same level of support that things like the children, or the groups like the Children's Theater or the Junior Museum have. We haven't had a black and white ball for more than 4 years, and largely because the 2 previous balls barely made enough money to make the effort worthwhile. We have a challenge with individuals joining us to take part in the many activities, and so have taken to partnering with groups like the Kiwanis so that we have enough volunteers for the May Day post-parade, what we call the May Day Fair, and for the chili cook-off. We are currently exploring what we need to do. A big part of the problem is that in the last 30 years, there's been a significant erosion in what the city is willing to do and in what staff is available for us, so that we end up running programs solely with volunteers, and unlike the Junior Museum or the Children's Museum, we do not have necessarily a core support for some of the programs that we would like to preserve. My own sense, and this may just simply because after 30-plus years, I'm beginning to wear a little, is that it's going to be a challenge, how we keep this organization going and how we find ways, and as the community changes, the structure of the community changes, we have less people available to volunteer because both parents now work full-time. It'll be a challenge, and sort of that's where we are now. We've kind of struggled the last couple of years to try to find a new footing that will give us the sense that we can go on and do all of the things that we have done over the last 30 years. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm not sure how many answers I will have, but it is an issue. With things like recreation, you sign up for a particular sport or a particular time. There isn't the connection that you have when you join a production at the Children's Theater or at, with the art centers. We don't have a membership group that provides a base support to us. So we're constantly looking at ways how we can raise additional funding to go ahead and continue doing what we have been doing. We have worked with groups, mentioned earlier, the Magical Bridge. We've worked with groups, whether it's Friends of the Park or things like those organizations, to help them set up so that another segment of the community can continue kind of the sense of volunteerism and the need to supplement what the city provides in terms of hard funding by sweat, and we're very proud of being able to do that. But it does, over time, I think, take a big toll on the people who are the ones that are expected to produce the actual events like the chili cook-off or the Mayfair parade and the fair itself. So let me end there and say thank you for asking us to appear before you and to confess honestly that I think right now we are struggling with how we've devised a way forward that involves raising significant amounts of money. So I'll stop there and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jeff, would you like me to start with you as the liaison and invite you to either question or even add to...
I would just like to thank Jack for all of his years of service, but also in this particular time, the challenges that are faced to continue the threads that the community has had over the years and to continue to push forward and keep some of those things that are familiar to people is very important. It's it's great to see the Mayfair every year, the May Parade, for example, and to know how long that has gone on in our community. And I think that is something that is very special, and just appreciate all the sacrifices that you've made. And I think the really key part you hit on is just, besides the funding, is can we find the people? Where is our community now with volunteerism? And I think that's a huge question for everyone. And something with us on the commission we have faced in terms of, okay, finding volunteers to do something or being asked to help find people to do things. And we do need to do that. And it's something for our whole community to really think about. But I want to thank you for everything that you've done in all of your years of service.
Thank you. I concur with you. I think what makes us a community is those little things that we as parents with a 7-year-old or a 4-year-old may do once a year for 5 years until they grow out of it, and then they take on or soccer, or, I mean, we have a rich variety of things that we do in this community, and I think we send young people away with a sense of themselves and a sense of their community, and it's because of the kinds of things that we've been able to do over the years. And so I think, one thing I shared with Ann is that makes us who we are, and so it's worth trying to struggle to make sure that we preserve, that there's another, I think we're 90-some years of Mayfair parades, and we'll make it to 100, and then we'll add as many things that we can that involve people, because it's the connection, I think, between what people do and what they enjoy doing that makes us a community. So thank you.
Only fair, Ann, that I give you the opportunity to speak next, and also feel free to question and or add.
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, Jack, thank you very much for everything you and the board have done over the years. The list of Recreation Foundation contributions is quite lengthy, and I'm sure that a lot of people in the community don't know about it. You know, we may be, I say we may be the best kept secret in town, but such wonderful, wonderful opportunities for kids and for the community and all of that, from the chili cook-off to the Mayfay Parade, and I could just kind of go on and on and on. I think it's significant tonight that Monica Engel is sitting in the audience because she had a big hand in the original black and white ball from Addison School, and it was actually one of hers and my ideas to start that whole thing. So this is a little history lesson for the commissioners. At any rate, I'm hopeful, Jack, that in thinking about what you had to say, and I know how true it is to find volunteers and find people who are committed, I'm hopeful that your board has been able to review the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and take a look at it and see how we could capture the community's imagination to get involved in making some of those things happen, because every good movement needs a cause, a reason to be, a reason to get excited about something. And whether it's getting excited once again about Cubberley or a new field or some of the open space, I mean, I think there's so much for the Recreation Foundation to do, and I don't want to see it just wither away. So I think we've got a good liaison here, and again, I'm happy to jump in as well. But thank you for everything, and tell the board thank you for their commitment as well.
I certainly will. The challenge is that, you know, styles of living have changed. We don't have as many free parents that can, you know, spend an hour and a half once a month because, you know, they work in San Jose or the city. And so how we make up for that is one of our challenges, and how we involve people that have recently joined our community. And we have had a large turnover in the last 5 years. How we get people to reinvest themselves in what we do, and in what we do for each other is our ongoing challenge. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
David, do you have any comments?
I've been a resident for 40 years, and I never knew how the Mayfay Parade and Fair came about, nor the chili cook-off. And somehow I thought it was 100% the staff. And so to find out about this best-kept secret is that, well, it presents two challenges. How do you get the word out and not be the best-kept secret? And then how do you get volunteers? And growing up with our family for 3 kids, I've known that, especially the Mayfay Parade, you get so many of the school kids and the bands and school groups that, and all the parents do is stand on the sidelines and cheer their child for the 2 minutes that they've walked by. And so if there was some way that we could not only get the Kiwanis or the Rotary Club, but also the parents of the kids and also the high school kids to help out in these things. And as Ann pointed out, there are many programs that we would like to see in the Parks Master Plan that the staff may or may not have time to do, and certainly would like a core group of volunteers to help with. Not a core group, I meant volunteers. They don't have to be the same people at all of these events. So anything that we could do to spread the word would be really great.
We welcome suggestions. I mean, we have looked at, you know, since we all have done multiple things, it's really easy to identify with some of the things that go on in our community. Any of us who have had a child in the Children's Theater, we're there, we go to the hot dog, summertime theater. It somehow, for some reason, we haven't been able to get the same kind of, say, connection with swimming. Even though we've funded swimming, we need lifeguards. Lifeguards need equipment. It doesn't matter what activity, but it's somehow, there's just enough difference that it's very hard to bring all those parents in. And our challenge is to find a way in which to do it. It's not, I think, that those parents wouldn't be happy to participate. It's how do we get them so they're aware of the need, I think is the answer.
Jeff?
Jack, I want to thank you, as everyone else has, for your service to our community, and I know it extends beyond this to other organizations as well, such as Canopy, one of my favorite groups, and many others. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, so thank you very much. I just want to briefly echo a couple of things that David said. The plague of being the best kept secret is I'm not sure people really know how to get involved and pitch in and lend a hand. And it seems like there's some way to improve the outreach through the schools, both to the parents and to the high school students. We have a big community of high school students that's looking to fill volunteer hours, and it seems like if there were a way to reach out to them, it's like, yeah, I love the Mayfeb parade, but I'm too old to really want to be involved with that. Oh, I can help the little kids. Yeah, that could really resonate with them. I think there's some real potential there. So I think that would be worth pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just jump in for 1 second? I feel like I need to kind of correct something that you said, David, because the city staff does do a wonderful job of helping and putting on the Mayfay Parade, and the city staff does do an awful lot for the chili cook-off. So the Recreation Foundation, at least in the past, has provided support and supplemental stuff to these incredible events we have in Palo Alto so they don't go away. So I just wanted to, okay. Good.
Thank you. It is the case that it is a active participating partnership, and we could not do what we do without staff. And our question has been, I think our complaint has been, is way back in the days that we used to have more staff to help us more, and but we don't have that now. This is the current reality. Staff does what it can with the resources it has, and we supplement those as best we can, and we look for ways in which to involve the larger community, because our survival depends on people knowing that what we've provided to the community. And if they don't know that, they're not going to be there to make sure it gets saved over the next decades. Thank you.
Keith?
Yeah, thank you again. The programs that you put on really changed the city from being just a city to being a community, and that's very important. It really influences the quality of life, so I thank you for all your work. I echo Jeff's point about seniors. They are looking for volunteer hours, and that goes on the transcript. So that's really big when you're applying for colleges, that they say how many hours that you volunteered. So outreach to the city, I think, would be a very good way to get volunteers.
We do try to get them for things like World Music Day. We get them involved where we can get them hours. They do, a number of them do help us with the May Day Fair, because Mayfay takes a lot of bodies. So we're always happy to have them, and we do our best to kind of make sure that they understand we have opportunities, and we're more than happy to sign off their hours that they need to demonstrate, and greatly appreciate their willingness to do so.
But I'd lived here for 20 years, and before I joined the board, I didn't know anything about either the Friends of Palo Alto Parks or the Recreation Foundation. So there really is, I think, some lack of publicity. And since you do help the city so much, I think that, for example, I've spent many hours at sporting events and watching kids for hours and hours. You're a captive audience there. So putting up signs, they don't have to be large signs, but either on the outfield or by the stands that say volunteer or donate to the Recreation Foundation, I think that would be very effective, just because there are so many people out there that don't know about your foundation.
Thank you.
So that's it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff. I would echo an awful lot of things that other commission members said, but also echo the things that you said, Jack. I particularly echo the fact that the things that you're helping with help make this a community. You said that, Keith said that. I think that's an important thought. I think the thing you said about the style of living, the style of living has changed. But I think that creates the challenge of the style of communication and motivation relative to funding and volunteer change. I kind of doubt that we can sit here and solve your problems. But I know that if we were sitting here at an Environmental Volunteers Board meeting, we'd be having the same discussion. If we were sitting here at an Audubon Board meeting, we'd be having the same discussion. Is how do you get more volunteers? How do you get more funding? So it's not an uncommon challenge. But frankly, your presentation, your discussion, and particularly a word that you used in terms of partnering with the city, partnering with the Kiwanis. I think in today's style of living and in today's style of nonprofit world, partnering becomes even more important, and you've obviously embraced that for a long time and are acting on it now. So I don't want to just say anything more or tell you how to do this, but to say thank you and tell you that I'm certainly energized to do what I can to work with you from the commission point of view, from a personal point of view, to see if we can improve the community funding and participation for what you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And
Keith,
if you
you wanna-
wake up in the middle of the night with the most brilliant idea, let us know.
Yeah.
We'll try anything.
I have one quick follow-up. So if you had more money and more volunteers, do you know what you would do next? Are there some regrets or some missed opportunities you think you've had that just you didn't have the ability to put things on?
No, I mean, I think we have preserved those events that impact the community most. You know, whether it's the May Day celebration, whether it's World Music Day, whether it's Chili Cook-Off. I think our concern is just that having more money means you can do more things. And so how we, raise money and preserve it, I mean, you want it to be sort of, in a way, repetitious. You want a way, the black and white ball for a number of years, 20 plus years, served us. So every couple of years, we'd have a major event, took a huge amount of energy and effort, but then we had funding for a couple of years. So that, I think looking at how we do that, and besides that, the black and white ball is a community event. It's an event for as many parents as we can get away, from the house to join us on a Saturday night. And so we want that to be a part of the many community events that we have. So it's something that I think we've really, really spent a lot of time thinking about, is how, on a Saturday night at 8 o'clock, do you get 800 or 900? We used to get 2,000-3,000 people. Now it's 800 or 900 that would come out to join, in a celebration of their community. I mean, that's the sort of thing.
So you're saying if you had more money, you wouldn't necessarily have more events, you would just increase the scope of the events that you would have, or?
Well, there's all sorts of funding things that staff will point out to us, whether it's something is needed for the teens at Mitchell Park, they need, somebody will say we need some money, whether it's a sound box or whether it's something we need at Rinconada. And they just, when they tell us about it, we figure out how we're going to fit it into our budget. So
Keith, very often in the days of the foundation, we would fund things that were new, that maybe were not in the city budget, didn't have time to get in the city budget, but somebody would come to us with a great idea. And so the foundation would decide to go ahead and do that event, get it started as a first-year event, and then when the city would be able to fund it, it turned over into the city.
Right, and things like the Bay Run and that sort of thing were perfect examples of that. And then we try to find an outside partner that would be, whether it was the Weekly or whoever, who would be willing to kind of take it on and then give it, give it longevity, which was a key thing for how we did it. I think, in truth, when we look back over what we have been able to not only to preserve, but to continue through multiple generations of youngsters growing up in a community in which there are things that make them understand this is my community and I got to do that. I'm sure my son never woke up at law school in New York and said, oh, man, that May Day parade. But I did. I thought of, here is, I'm a young kid who understood what it was to be community. And I think in some ways that has something to do with the fact that he's a public service lawyer. So, his sense of community got built here. I'm very proud of the fact that this community does do that a lot with a lot of kids. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for hearing us. And again, we're happy to hear what you would like us to do, and we'll look for ways to make it possible.
One more comment, and that is that you're bringing up a point. There are a number of things that we take for granted, that I've taken for granted, that the staff does, and I don't know how it gets done, but things like the bands in the park and movie nights at Foothill and things like that I want to, in the parks master plan, we talk about a number of those opportunities and a number of those things that we just take for granted. So I'm hoping that staff will let us know if they need help for those kinds of things, so that we don't take them for granted and that we don't lose them.
Well, things like music in the park and the movies, we start it, we make it work once, and then we figure out how can we make it work 100 times. So in the case, we ran the Twilight concerts for, 10 years, and then we got the Children's Theater to take it over because they had a lot of parents. That's one wonderful thing. So you can get out there, and we just make it work. With staff tells us, hey, we've done it again and again, and we say hooray, and sometimes I think we forget to say thanks to staff. But we do one thing. We have a staff golf tournament, which is entirely for them, and that's one of the things that we make sure gets funded. So those who are willing to pick up a golf club can actually go out now to the new greens and hopefully understand that we appreciate, even though often we don't say thank you enough or loud enough. So thank you again for hearing us, and thank you for all you do.
And Chair?
Thank you.
Could I just
Kristen?
make a statement for Jack, too, is thank you for those words, but the thanks also should go to you and the foundation. A lot of what we do, we couldn't do without you, and like you said, a lot of the things that we do now, you started, and so we're really grateful for all the years and all the contributions. Thank you especially for the golf tournament. I'm excited to participate in that this year. And then I'd like to explore a little bit, and maybe with you, Commissioner Lemire, and Commissioner McDougall, on how we can maybe ramp up our efforts a little bit and, start addressing some of these things. I think sometimes we get caught in our regular, we have the parade, we have the fair, we have, these various different things, but now what can we add to that, and how can we ramp it up a little bit? So I look forward to that and continuing this partnership.
All right, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Kristen, counting in to help. The next item on the agenda is the Cubberley Master Plan co-design process and the introduction of the consultants.
Thank you. Kristen O'Kane.
And I would allow Kristen to provide the introduction, of course.
Sure. You can sit over here, Bob. Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. I'm happy to introduce our consultant for the Cubberley Master Plan co-design process, Concordia. The council approved the agreement, our contract agreement with Concordia last month, and also a cost share agreement with the school district. So as you probably recall, the school district and the city are collaborating with the community on this co-design process, and the school district and city are sharing equally in the costs to do this. So to my right are Bobby Hill and Connor McManus from Concordia, and they're in town this week, and so I thought it was perfect timing for them just to introduce themselves, share a little bit about the past project that they've worked on in Emeryville, and also the process for moving forward. It's not going to be your typical, I guess, community meetings that many of us have experienced in the past. I think it's going to be a lot more fun and exciting and productive than the days of old. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bobby and Connor.
Good evening. So delighted to have a chance to meet with you all tonight. And I have to say, hearing of pickleball was a first for me tonight. We hadn't reached it to New Orleans yet, but maybe it will. But it sounds pretty fun. And also just to make a comment about this strong sense of community and commitment to community that we heard from the previous presentation. We so believe in that, and hope as well to illustrate community building in how we intend to approach the planning for the Cubberley project. And maybe there's even a chance in that process to recruit volunteers for some of the work that you spoke of tonight. So we are Concordia. We are from New Orleans, Louisiana. Concordia is our one-word mission statement. It is the Latin root of the word concord, which is harmony and agreement among people and things. And that is who we are, that's what we're passionate about, and that is our approach to doing planning and design work in projects all over the country. This is who we are. We're not a big firm, we're small, and in part because we work closely as a family and as a team, but also this allows us, when we work in other places, to work collaboratively. So we don't have to have a big organization that's going to do everything. It's very important for us to find local partners, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and what we plan to do here in Palo Alto. Just these two things just to share with you, I guess, our flexibility and our experience across the country and in some other countries as well. And also the diagram on the right, which really explains our approach to doing work. We call this our Nexus model, which is a framework for systemic planning and a framework that we will use when we pick up the ball at Cubberley to think about the creation of a holistic community center that serves the whole community, thinking about the physical, cultural, social, organizational, educational, and economic components that make a whole of a community. So we do this through a co-design process, and that means that we work with local folks, and there is no limit to how many people. And we do this in a process that happens under one roof, and it's iterative. We do not work where we have a meeting with a particular constituency and get their ideas and then come back and then go to another constituency. We believe that that needs to happen all together and people working collaboratively to develop those recommendations. So we've done a number of projects, much like what we anticipate here at Coverly, and this is just some quick slides from some of those, everything from central Wisconsin to this is still Wisconsin, I'm sorry, and just some examples of what our activity sheets look like, what the participation looks like at tables, and how we're actually getting people involved in doing the real work. This is another project in Houston, again, a similar process where the community came together and designed this entire campus. Same thing with the project in Alexandria, Virginia. The one that I'll highlight for you tonight actually is the Emeryville Center for Community Life, just up the road a bit. We actually think that there will probably maybe sometime after the first meeting, we'll see if some local folks are interested in taking a little trip up to Emeryville and see. This is actually, this is an 8-acre piece of property, not nearly as big as what we have at Coverly, but the city and the school came together and jointly funded this project and planned this project. And while it does hold the entire school district of Emeryville from a TK-8 to 12th grade, it is called the Emeryville Center for Community Life because it is just so much more than a school. And you can see we also, the way that we could do this and do it efficiently on such a small piece of property was to really look at understanding utilization, making sure that all of the spaces were utilized as much as possible to be efficient, and also to look at the cost of operations and maintenance and such. And actually ended up saving the overall project costs and operations by 20% less than what it would have been if everybody had acted independently. And so this is just a site plan of all of the different things that are contained on this project, and again, created in a community process where they determined what was most important, what they needed, and most importantly, what supported students and families in Emeryville, and creating a real there for this community. And again, these are just some images of the project, a pool that serves the students and the community, fields, performing arts center and such. And again, this was completed in Emeryville. So now I'm going to turn it over to Connor, who's going to share a little bit about the timeline and the process.
Thank you, Bobby. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. I'm going to walk through just essentially what our general plan is for the Coverly project. What you see right now is the timeline for the next year. We do have our meeting dates pinned down, which will all take place at Coverly starting October 4th, which actually this is an outdated slide. Our first meeting will be October 4th. We have one in November, one in January, and then one to cap the whole process in May. We're essentially, the first two meetings are part of the programming phase, and we'll be working towards getting a final, we're going to work towards 3 program scenarios that will explore how the new community center and a potential new school site can integrate together. And based on the outcome of that, we're going to work towards basically developing 3 to 6 real conceptual 3D master plans for the site. And that will all ultimately be honed down into one preferred recommendation. So this project, obviously, it's a little bit unusual in that we essentially have 2 clients. We're working with the city and PAUSD, and so everything that we're doing is going to be based on their mutual needs, as well as what we hear from the community stakeholders through the engagement process. So just to begin with, for the past month, we've been digging and reading as much as we can about past efforts, both for Coverly site and for the city at large, and what's come out of PAUSD as far as planning for future educational needs, enrollment, and their ideas about the Coverly. So just to pull out one of these that I'm sure you have particular interest in, we did look through the master plan for parks, trails, and open space, and just the first thing that jumped out to us is that this list on the right are just some of the things that, based on everything we've read, it seems like Coverly could support some of these ideas. Of course, we haven't made any decisions about it, but at least several of these were also mentioned in the CCAC report from the 2013 plan. And so right now, we're really just looking for synergy across all the existing work that's been done so that we can sort of hone it down and present it to the community in a really understandable, digestible way so that at our first meeting, we can base the future planning work off of what's already been done before. And just as an example of some of the GIS mapping that we're doing right now to consolidate a lot of the different information that we're finding in different plans. This is essentially the existing bike network overlaid with the future bike plan in the Parks and Open Trails plan, and then in this slide, other community assets kind of organized in our Nexus framework. And we're going to give we're also looking similarly on the site itself, and we're also going to be looking at the scale of in walking distance with, particularly with Mitchell Park right there, to make sure that what happens at Coverly is planned in coordination with what's immediately around it.
So we want to check in with you and see if you have any questions so far.
David?
So I just want to make sure that this is great that you've looked through all this information and you're not going to start at square one. You're going to take a tremendous amount of input that we've already gotten, and the Parks Master Plan, which we spent 2 to 3 years working on. And so maybe you can explain how you're going to keep it, how you're going to keep it to a manageable time frame.
At the meetings, you mean?
Well, we have 4 public meetings scheduled over this next year between September and May. We are very used to having meetings of anywhere between 80 to 300 people, and sometimes we've actually had a meeting with 2,500 people. Just as a little aside, we designed and led the post-Katrina recovery planning in New Orleans. So you can imagine the tension and the stress and the dismay and everything else. And so there wasn't a person who attended those meetings that was a very happy camper, rightfully so. So we're very used to working at such a scale. And also, I might add, that plan was completed starting from scratch and completed in 7 months, and was approved by, first of all, the people who did the plan, and then the City Planning Commission, the City Council, the mayor, and then the governor, and then sent to the feds and that was the key to having federal funding beginning to roll. And by the way, that plan was the 3rd attempt at conducting a plan. So not only was it challenging post-Katrina, but there had been 2 failed attempts. So we were really up against the wall in that. So we are used to a sense of pressure. And also, as I think Kristen said in the beginning, our approach to doing this work is it is fun. I mean, and there has been a lot of work that's been done. So our very first meeting is going to be to honor that, to consolidate it and put it all together and understand where everything crosses and where there's some really significant opportunities. And so we fully intend to take advantage of all the great work that's done. And frankly, that will have a lot to do with why it shouldn't take as long. So we're very committed to having this done in our time frame. Any other questions?
Ann, do you have comments?
First of all, thanks for the timetable. Again, I'm pretty excited about having a vision in May, right? And I'm excited that you're going to incorporate the past reports, but certainly not be bound by them. So that's a really, really good thing. I'm hopeful that we all come out of this with a really cool vision about what this site is going to be, because as we said in the ad hoc committee, people really love Cubberley and they're very invested in it, and they have a lot of strong feelings about how it should be used. So I'm just interested to know how you're going to just get the word out that people are welcome to come to any community meetings. So it's great that you have 80 to 200 people and sometimes up to 2,500. We have a community of, what are we now, 60,000? And we just want to make sure that all those different groups and all those different voices feel like they have a chance to be heard, because I would love to see this move forward quickly.
Well, thank you very much. And this last slide, I think, maybe it's our second to last slide. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Anne, because getting the word out is really probably the most important upfront work. We are working with Claudia from the city's communication office, as well as PAUSD. You've given us in the ad hoc committee some good ideas. So we'd like to get in front of the news, that's out there, and opportunities to be, in front of editorial boards or whatever is appropriate, and get people excited about this. Obviously, there'll be a lot of social media. I will say, and we will have some opportunities for people to participate online, but that will never replace the face-to-face. And just to say, we're really committed to that, and we know that's where the real work gets done. I mean, oftentimes it's very easy for somebody to sit back and, in the comfort of their easy chair, offer ideas or complain about one thing or another. And so, we expect that to happen, but the real work will happen in the larger community meetings, and that will all be recorded and made available online and available for people to make comments and such. So, and social media and any other tools that we have. Okay. So getting the word out, we'd like to lean on all of you to help do that. We do have a flyer that can be distributed electronically as well as by hand that really outlines the goals of the project and a timeline. I think it's about a 2-pager that we've collaboratively created with the city and the school district. And then one other thing to mention, I think it was mentioned a little bit earlier, and that is that we have done this all over the country, but we bring on community fellows. And in this case, we think it would be 6 to 8 people. I want to be sure to explain that our Community Fellow Program is not the same as what you might typically see, where you have an advisory committee where 6 or 8 people are selected and they're supposed to be representative of the community's demographics, and they have meetings and then maybe they go to bigger meetings. That's not what this is. This is a team of people who we will identify and we will select in collaboration with the city and the school district. And these are people who are seen as leaders, but if you will, sort of behind the scenes leaders, people who don't come with an agenda, people who have networks, people who really care about the community and don't really necessarily have super strong opinions, but they're here because they care, and they will work side by side with us as citizen planners, and they will help us develop culturally appropriate agendas and activities and those kinds of things. But we're not asking them to come with any other, if you will, ideas or agendas. And so they'll work with us to help recruit people to participate. That'll be a very significant role that they have. They'll also act as table hosts when we actually conduct the meetings. And it's a chance to really leave behind another group of people that are just invested in a special way. So we are now looking for, 4 or so representatives from the community. The school district will also then, offer up 4 or so representatives. We will likely have a couple of high school students, which we think would be fabulous. We love having the youth voice in this. So we would welcome any recommendations from any of you, and maybe Kristen can send the 2-pager that is the fellows packet, so you can get a little stronger sense of what we're looking for there. And then if you have any recommendations, you can contact me, and I'll either meet people in person or pick up the phone, and then we'll determine that before we have our first meeting. So that's another way you could really be helpful to us. And spread the word. And I think, again, we want to also say that we are reading your master plan, and we want to make sure that in whatever way the Coverly plan can support your goals and objectives, that we fully intend to do that. So if you have any other questions, we welcome.
I'd like to give some others. Jeff, you're also on the ad hoc, so maybe you'd like to comment first. Or us random people do.
Sure. Thank you, Don. Certainly very excited, and as has been said before, the potential for Coverly is amazing, and it can, the thought of what can be done with it and what we haven't thought of is really incredible. So thank you for participating in this, and we're excited to get it going. One quick question, how much did that Emeryville Center cost? Do you guys know what that ended up costing? Just $96 million. Okay. And then I think, again, to underscore, getting that community involvement. I know we've had other projects that go forward, and at times there isn't the participation that we would want for the impact that it's going to have on the community. But I also think that the more people that we have involved, this is something that is there's going to need to be funding for it. And so the more critical mass we have going in terms of people being invested in the planning of it, or people being invested in giving their ideas, and you have a lot of different constituencies that this serves. And I think the more people that we do get involved, the better chance we have of pushing this forward. And as Ann had mentioned previously, just how long this project has been going on, and to see it have potential to come to fruition would be quite a major accomplishment. But I think it could have such impact upon our community. And to take what Jack was talking about and what Keith had said is, how does your city become a community? And this is one of the ways. So appreciate what's happening, and excited to see it move forward. But just we do certainly, all of us still have our work cut out for us, and a long ways to go. But I myself am very, very excited to see this happening.
Thank you.
Keith? I'm not sure this is a question for you or Kristen. How are we working the budget for this? Are they saying you're giving them a single number for a target, or are they giving a range of targets and they can give us trade-offs of, for this amount you get this design, or this amount you get this design?
Do you mean for Concordia's
For
scope
Concordia's,
of work?
when they're doing the design, do they?
No, he means for the cost of it. You mean for the cost of the plan? I mean
No, the cost of the design.
of the design?
Yeah, I mean, not of the design, making the design, but building the design.
But the building design.
So that we have included in the contract is their scope of work, and it's divided by task and cost associated with each task.
No.
Is that, I guess I'm not clear.
We will, if we need to, bring in cost estimators. I mean, that's certainly a consideration, obviously. This is not the moon or an unlimited budget. So once we confirm the program, and then we make considerations for that program and cost implications, and then use that to develop scenarios. So obviously, that's a very important part.
Okay, so you're giving us multiple scenarios with multiple price points?
I would say
Potentially?
yes.
You may find that you don't need that.
Obviously, with a major consideration for cost,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, one of my big concerns is that, we have champagne taste, but
Yeah.
our budget is not champagne.
Right.
So my personal opinion is that one thing that needs to be taken into account is expansion. That maybe right now we do something that is good enough, and 20 years from now we want to expand it. And if that expansion is into the design, I think that could be a much more elegant expansion than if you kind of have to hack something in that looks like an add-on.
So one element of our scope as it is planned is that we will be looking at looking at the site in terms of phases. So there will be some consideration for short-term, medium-term, long-term, and that will play into it.
And let me also add that in Emeryville, there were buildings that were kept and restored and renovated, for cost savings, as well as new construction. So we work, it's not often that we work in a community like Palo Alto that has more resources than most places. So cost considerations with school districts, with other municipalities is always front and center. So you can be assured that we're well aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff?
Thank you for your presentation and joining us this evening. This is undoubtedly a challenging project, at least from our perspective, but it's good to hear you've certainly dealt with challenges before. I'm wondering if you've ever worked on a project with dual clients, as you
Yes,
characterized it here.
actually, on a number of occasions, and Emeryville in particular was joint. It was the school district and the city, and they co-funded it.
So a similar structure as we
Yes,
have here.
yes.
That's great. The approach sounds very encouraging with the public meetings at all. An important key, and I'm sure you have been to a lot more of these meetings than I have, but the important key is to make the participants feel heard and valued as opposed to managed. And I wonder what your tricks are on that.
Well, you know what our trick is? We don't give anybody the microphone. I will tell you that. It's not that kind of a meeting. People are going to be sitting at tables of 6 to 8 people, and they're going to be doing work. And this is an iterative process. So while people can come at any point and they can find out what happened previously and get caught up. So anybody is invited to come anytime. However, we really encourage people to come and then come back and see their work. They will see what they've done. They will recognize what they've done. They'll understand the synthesis and then move to the next phase. So this is not where somebody gets the microphone for 3 minutes and they get their chance to get mad or get glad. That's just not how we do it. So it's very different in that regard, and it's team building, it's community building, because people have to hash it out together. And so and again, I mean, we say we have scars all over us because we've done this kind of work in some very challenging places, and I think I might have said to the ad hoc group, we've worked in Camden, New Jersey, and West Philly, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and places like that. But I will also say that oftentimes communities that do have a lot of resources with highly educated people can be even more challenging. So we have some of that experience as well. So it's not to say that, somebody might go off, that could happen, but but we've seen it before. So, and we think what we see over time is that people recognize this is a different way of getting the work done, and they become really engaged and focused on getting the work done, and it ends up being a great thing.
Well, that's great. We're certainly all very interested in resolution to this valuable resource within our community, and really looking to make it shine. Just one final comment. As the community garden liaison on the commission, I was quite happy to see that you called out community gardens as a potential for Coverly. It'd be great to see something carved out in that area, something that isn't there right now.
Great.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for your presentation, and thank you particularly for running through the first part quickly so we could get to the discussion part. I really appreciate that. A couple of things that I would worry about. Number one, I'm glad you think that it'll be challenging, because I think that's the only thing we can promise you.
Oh, sure.
Is that we'll help make it challenging as a city, and also recognizing that we may be a rich community, but we're not a rich community, and so funding is always a challenge. When I'm at Mitchell Park or when I'm at Coverly, the one thing I notice that's different than a lot of other locations you go to in the city is the amount of diversity. That there is a much more diverse community, and the previous speaker talked about community in those two locations. And I think that needs to be an important part of your consideration. And I think another important part of your consideration needs to be the north-south thing about Palo Alto. There is a north and there is a south, and Cumberly is clearly south, and I think that needs to be a consideration. And I'm not trying to tell you what kind of consideration. Does that, how do you deal with that? But I think that's important. I'm glad to hear you say phases. I think what might satisfy Keith is if you fundamentally came up with a basic design and then sort of like options, as opposed to, give us 4 different designs. I think something like that and maybe the phases provides that for us. I think the last thing is, as much as we talk about community and involvement, the last time we did some community outreach at Cumberly, it wasn't that big an event because it was just a lighting issue, but we set up 30 or 40 chairs and we waited for half an hour and 2 people came in, I think by accident, and were willing to talk to us about it. And I think that you do need to really focus, and I think we'll commit that we'll help get people there, but I think that it would be insufficient to rely on us to fill your room.
Oh, sure.
And so you need to worry about the other kind of media and activity and whatnot that you do.
Well, absolutely. I do want to reiterate that probably one of the biggest challenges is just making sure that we recruit people to participate, because the more people are there, the better the product will be. And obviously, more of an opportunity to get support for funding and implementation. I will say when we were here last in town, we put an email out, or actually, Ann? No, not Ann. What's her name? Amy, who runs Cumberly, put an email out to all of the Cumberly tenants, and we had quite a few people show up. I mean, obviously they would. They're very interested in what's going to happen to them, but we had a fantastic meeting with them. No promises, but certainly they're there. They're very invested. They have people who come to their programs. I mean, they'll be a great source, obviously, of people who will participate. That job is never done, frankly. I mean, even when we have the first meeting, we still need to work hard at getting people to come and continue to come and bring in new people.
Yeah, and I'm sure you understand that if you mostly listen to current stakeholders as opposed to what it could be, that of course is dangerous as well.
Oh, sure.
Do you have any comments on this?
Forgive me that I missed most of your presentation. The one question I have, and if you've already covered this, then I'm perfectly happy to catch up with you after the meeting or at another time. But I'm curious about places where the needs or goals of the school district and the city diverge, and how you plan to help bridge that gap.
Well, I think a couple of things. When we highlighted the Emeryville project, which is 8 acres, here you have the school district with 27 and the city with 8. We managed to put quite an exciting and diverse program on that 8 acres. I think as planners and designers, we have ideas and solutions that maybe typically people don't think of around solving these kinds of problems. And so I would say that with that acreage, I think there's plenty of opportunity to come up with design options that will satisfy both of the major partners in this. I really don't think it's a problem. I think what we understand so far is that the city, and I would say the Cumberly community who are conducting the programs, probably are clearer about what it is they want and need than the school district is, because they're still wondering about their demographics and do they have a shrinking population, or if there's more housing built, are they going to have more people, and maybe their need is not as immediate and as pressing. but I don't think we'll have a problem figuring that out. So, and I would also say that when you do have diverging opinions, the best way to solve that is for people to be in the room together and not separately. And that's really our goal of how we will approach this. And whenever we have meetings, I mean, we have Kristen by our side and we have Bob Golton or other school representatives. They have to be in it with us from the beginning. Everybody needs to make sure that they're there and they're hearing the same thing, and that, we're being fair and equitable in all these conversations. And so it's not to say there won't be some, maybe some diverging ideas, but I think we can figure it out. Like I said, we've dealt with some very challenging issues, again, post-Katrina, that I would say would be maybe as challenging or maybe more so than what we might face here in terms of diverging opinions and stuff. So, yeah, we're up for it.
Excellent.
Do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
No, we're
Otherwise, Kristen?
Thank you. A couple things I wanted to say is that, one, we're not just relying on Concordia to get the word out to the community. It's definitely a team effort between the Community Services Department, but also the City Manager's Office and the Communications Office. So we've already posted on the city's webpage the recruiting community fellows. That's also was sent out via Nextdoor. I'm not sure, did anyone see it? No? Oh, you did? Okay. So that sort of thing will continue, and also through the neighborhood groups, the existing neighborhood associations. But it would be helpful, the more people we can get the word out to, if each of you tell whatever groups you're in or organizations or, neighborhoods, that just gets the word out more and more. So we're going to tap every possible resource we can to get people to come to the meeting. And the other thing, I apologize, Stephen. I failed to introduce Stephen, who's also a big part of the team. Stephen Bingler with Concordia. He's a founder of Concordia, and he's has a lot of wonderful experience, just like Bobby and Connor do. So I'm really excited to have them on board. I wish we would have had more time to have them talk about some of the other projects that they worked on. But if you're interested, the information is in the PowerPoints, and you could research those if you wanted, or, and if you have any questions about anything on those projects, you're more than welcome to let us know as well. So I know I'm really excited, and I'm really hopeful that we'll have a really exciting product come out of this process. So thank you.
Do you have case studies on your website at all?
Oh, yes, lots
Okay.
of them.
So I think I would encourage people to spend some time researching it. I am very confident in Kristen's choice, and I think this is going to be a very, very exciting project, and I think you have our support, and let's go do it.
Well, we're thrilled and we're honored to be here working in Palo Alto. So we look forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
this
very much.
opportunity.
Thank you.
And now for the exciting part of the evening.
So I'll go ahead while they're setting up. So as you know, Council recently adopted the budget for fiscal year 19. So I thought this would be a good time to bring in Darren and Jasmine to talk about not only the budget, but also the CIP budget process, which I believe someone had requested just a little bit of information on how do we develop the CIP, the capital improvement program and plan every year. So Darren's going to touch on that. And then we also have some changes to the CSD's municipal fees and also our fee reduction program. So we've grouped this all together to, try and cover any important and pertinent information about our fiscal year 19 budget. So I will turn it over to Darren and Jasmine.
All right. Thank you. I'm Jasmine LeBlanc with the Community Services Department. I'm going to start the presentation talking about the operating budget and municipal fees, and then Darren will take it over and talk about the capital budget. So quickly, our operating budget, CSD, the Community Services Department, is one of the largest departments in the city. It has an operating budget in fiscal year 2019 of over $29 million. There's 78 full-time positions and 298 part-time positions in the city, which equates to about 51 full-time positions.
Hey, Jasmine, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but maybe you can give us a little bit more breakout in terms of the full-time positions and the part-time folks. Where are the majority of the division's resources being spent?
Let me come back to that after I look, because I've got my folder of Q&A things.
Okay, perfect.
But I can't say right off the top of my head. I guess I can tell you the part-time hugely is related to seasonal employees. So a lot of that are camp staff in the summer. But I will get back to you on the full-time. So on the major year-over-year adjustments, the biggest change is that the golf course is reopened, and now we have one golf course operator, so a different contract structure. The different contract structure has resulted in revenue and expense increases that are over $1 million in both areas. We also were asked to make some reductions in the budget this year, and so we were able to find about $90,000 of cuts in non-personal expenditures across the department, so mainly in program areas that we call recreation and housekeeping and administrative expenses. So we've got a $90,000 cut across the department in that area, and we also eliminated 11 vacant part-time positions. Those vacant part-time positions totaled $180,000 in savings. One position was related to golf course maintenance, 6 were related to building maintenance, and 4 related to open space and parks maintenance. We do not expect...
What was the last category, I'm sorry?
Parks and open space maintenance. We will be monitoring these cuts very carefully this year, particularly in the parks and open space positions that were cut. We do expect that this could have some negative impact on our ability to respond to non-urgent requests in open space reserves. So we'll be kind of tracking that to make sure that it's something that we can manage. And if we find that it is really problematic, we'll request funding again. Another thing before we move on to municipal fees that I wanted to point out is that the operating budget was approved as proposed, but the City Council also approved a recommendation to reduce the general fund budget by $4 million in this fiscal year. So this would be across all city departments, not just the Community Services Department. And the council has requested that this budget reduction proposal be brought back to City Council later in this calendar year, 2018. We don't have details on exactly what this direction is from City Hall or City Council yet, but we expect that we'll get further information on this in the fall. So I'm going to move on to municipal fees. The next few slides give a brief summary of how CSD sets fees for service. And there's more detail.
Yeah, Jasmine,
Yeah.
maybe we should divide this up, so before you move on to
We could do
the
that.
fees,
Yeah.
maybe I should see if anybody has any particular questions relative to the budget. I think Ryan asked one question about more detail in the granular, and I think, in fact, we shouldn't expect you necessarily to come back here immediately or sit there and find the number for us, but maybe we can make a list of things that maybe we could get an email of or some follow-up later.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And another thing that Kristen just whispered to me, the org chart in the beginning of the budget, the operating budget, gives a sense too of sort of how our staff are divided, and it's
Right.
relatively even actually across arts and sciences, parks and open space, and recreation for the most part.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions
I have a
before we allow her
question.
to move on? Ann?
Yeah, thank you. So on the major year-over-year adjustments, could you talk a little bit about the elimination of the vacant positions? So these positions were just not being used, and they didn't get filled, and so they got eliminated. And there were 3 categories. One was the park and open space. What were the other 2?
Building maintenance and golf maintenance.
And, okay, the golf.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so will any of that be contracted out like you do for parks, or is it?
Yeah, maybe I can help answer that.
Thank
The temporary position that worked at the golf course was really a position that was associated with the old course, where that position was fully focused on addressing mainline breaks. Well, the entire main line's been replaced with the new project, so it really wasn't necessary. We've built in everything into that new contract that we would have gotten out of that employee. And regarding the open space and parks hourly positions, it was really on the park side. The open space side's interesting that even though it's comparable salaries for this entry-level seasonal position, the open space seems to draw folks who have a passion and long-term interest in being rangers and are willing to accept that rather low wage for the kind of work it is, and sometimes their education level is relatively high for that kind of work. Contrasting that with the parks temporary positions, we were not able to draw people. We'd interview, and people didn't want that job. It was a real challenge. We've conducted, over the last several years, multiple interviews, and the candidates either just weren't qualified enough to hire or weren't interested once they found out the rate. And so we ended up giving up those salary settings in this reduction. We'll be monitoring it. The biggest impact, in addition to the obvious one of being able to tackle extra work and get ahead on things, is that's where we draw upon when we want to promote people to promote within. You get to see them in action, you get to train them and really pick a solid team to promote. And we lose that, and it hurts because we will have people leaving in the not too distant future, and so we'll have to strategize on how to fill that in different ways.
Thank you.
To
David?
follow, I was going to say the building maintenance is custodial and janitorial. That one, similar to what Darren said, we had these part-time positions that were very hard to fill at our community centers that were just consistently being held vacant. And we recently sort of reorganized the structure, so we're using full-time custodians who we have been able to recruit and retain to the community centers. By using the full-time custodians, we actually feel like we're getting a better quality of service, more consistent staff, people showing up every day, and we were able to make that cut where we don't really think it's going to have a negative impact on the department. So really the main area that we're concerned with and want to monitor is in the parks positions that were cut.
David?
That's a good segue to my question, and that is that you made a major change last year in hiring Team Sheeper and to take some of those part-time, very difficult to fill positions and contracting them out. And do you see, so obviously this budget has taken that into consideration, the number of part-time employees reflects that, and do you feel that in light of this, the budget issues that we're talking about, that you would do more and more of that in the future, maybe on the maintenance side or in some of the other camp counselor side, something like that. Are there other organizations that you would be looking at versus full-time employees with pensions and health care and all that kind of stuff?
Maybe I could address the park side of that. As you say, can we address it with contracting out? Well, to that I'd say we have addressed that over the years. Enormous amount of our parks are maintained via contractor, the vast majority, in fact. Aside from irrigation and the athletic fields, it's all done via contractor. And at some point, the amount of resources it takes to manage that contractor, especially when you're talking about 180 sites that we have, is enormous. And especially with the way the bidding process goes, if you aren't watching like a hawk, you are going to get poor service. And I don't care how great your contractor is, my experience in 20 years with the city, I've dealt with a lot of contractors, is they're going to cut corners, and unless someone's watching, you're going to lose out. The other big cost is continuity. Those employees that I've seen are really quick turnovers. So there's no institutional knowledge passed on, which is really dangerous when you're talking about expensive infrastructure that's buried under the ground. It's just not enough to pass someone a map and expect them to fully understand all the intricacies of the irrigation system or the backstories of residents who have concerns and they want you to weed whip at a certain time. These are all nuances that are lost on contractors. So I think we've contracted out intelligently where we could, where it doesn't negatively impact the community, and drawn a line to say, these are the services that you need, sort of a more in-depth experience with longevity, better supervision, and better continuity.
I think that's a very good answer that Darren gave. I will say, each year, I suspect for the short term at least, we're going to be asked to make more cuts and be really creative with money. So we're constantly reassessing lines of service and if there's a better way to do it. And I think there may be more in the future that could result in more contracts. But I think, with regard to the in-house custodial, for example, they also are there as the only city employees on site when we're holding private events like weddings at Lucy Stern. And it's really nice to have someone who has been there for years, understands what is expected, and is a city employee kind of on the ground. So that's not something I think would make sense to contract out at this point.
Thank you for that. Now let's move to the...
Oh, I have one last quick question. And I think that we're all in consensus that Darren had a great response on the contractors, so well done. Knocked it out of the park. So it seems as though the golf position totally makes sense why you remove that. Same thing on realigning the custodial positions. What about these folks that were in the parks? And I appreciate that they haven't been filled for the last several years, but is there a need that's going unaddressed?
Yeah, I think you could legitimately say there is a need, and we would like them. We just had to make concessions as a department, and every division offered up something, and I think it was a reasonable accommodation because we had to meet these cuts, and we'll do our best on the belong, and we'll advocate to get them back. At least I certainly will, because at some point I would like it, but when it makes sense for the city to do so.
I appreciate that. So what's the plan in the near term? Are you just going to shuffle staff to have full-time people handle these tasks that used to be handled by the seasonal folks?
Yeah, I think that is how it's been. And I think at some point, as the seasonal staff gradually dwindled down over time, because I think it was more robust before I eventually joined with the Parks Department, the supervisors took on more of a role of a working supervisor. There's an element with the rangers too, where they're not just supervisors, not just managing, they're definitely holding weed whips and picking up trash and doing all those things. That's one way. Others is through partnerships with volunteers. We've got great relationships with Friends of Parks and Kiwanis. In my department report, which I cut a little brief, for example, we're having the Kiwanis Club right now come out monthly during the summer and redo a fence for us. it was kind of twofold. One, I don't have enough staff to do it, and two, the CIP that did the construction project to rebuild that park at Bowdoin was insufficiently funded, so there wasn't enough to do that fence. And so we found a different way. We kind of adapted and overcame.
That's right.
How long do you think that you'll need to do without, how long do you think you'll need to do without these positions?
I don't know. I think it's really difficult to say. As we looked at, you just heard about that $4 million cut. It's something I'm kind of anticipating we're going to have to deal with for quite some time, but I don't know.
It sounds to me like you'd already dealt with that flexibility because they were vacant positions. To me, the scarier thing is what part of the $4 million will you have to fund, and that, I think that's a bigger risk that we would look forward to even appealing at council or whatever else we might have to do to help you.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to invite you to go on to municipal fees.
All right, municipal fees. The next few slides talk about municipal fees. There's more detail in the memo that's attached to this agenda. And I'm just going to kind of quickly talk a little bit about the fee setting process itself. So we have several policies and procedures that guide the process. The city has a cost recovery level policy, which outlines how fees should be set across the city. And our department has a procedure to implement that policy with specific direction for our programs and services. And all the fees are approved in the municipal fee schedule every year by City Council. And they're maintained in the city's municipal fee schedule.
Jasmine, can you say that again? And can you move the mic a little closer to you?
Yes, sorry. Just the last part?
Yeah, just the last part.
Okay. All the fees are approved annually by the City Council, and they're adopted and maintained in a city municipal fee schedule.
Right.
So this next slide, I apologize, is with very tiny writing, but these are the cost recovery level groups that are that the city policy kind of categorizes all of our programs and services with a fee associated into. So we have low, medium, and high cost recovery groups with various policy parameters guiding staff in how to set the assignment. So you can see, for example, in the low cost recovery level group, you have programs where there may be no intended relationship between the amount paid and the benefit received. Whereas in the high cost recovery group, you may see programs or services where the use of that service is specifically discouraged by the city. So those are some of the parameters that are in the cost recovery policy. So the next slide shows you how we typically assign different types of programs and services within the community services department into those low, medium, and high categories. So, for example, you can see that in the low cost recovery, we've put special events. We see this as a majority community benefit with where we're not trying to recover a high level of cost. Versus in the high category, you can see facility rentals for private events, for example. So quickly, our programs and services are in general all available for residents and non-residents. Residents support CSD's programs and facilities through ongoing general fund contributions. And so we prioritize residents above non-residents whenever possible. And what this means to us is that residents are in general paying a lower fee for programs and services and are given access to book programs and services ahead of when they're open to non-residents. The non-resident premiums that we currently utilize aim to increase cost recovery levels while still maintaining prices that would actually be attractive to non-residents when there are spaces available. About 20% of our class and camp participants are non-residents, and we typically charge about 15% more for non-residents to participate in classes and camps, and anywhere from 15 to more than 50% more to book facility rentals, dependent on the location and day of the week. When we've taken looks at other neighboring communities, we've found that this is pretty typical, that a typical non-resident premium is set at 15 to 25%, although there are some communities that don't have any non-resident premium at all. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about the fee reduction program. Since 1996, the city has had a fee reduction program for low-income and disabled residents of Palo Alto to reduce the cost of classes, camps, and community garden fees. There have been several modifications to the program in the years since 1996, and the most recent change is that effective this July 1, we were able to add a group into the fee reduction program. So it previously was available to low-income youth and seniors and disabled residents of any age. We've been able to expand that to include low-income adults as well. So it now is available to any age, low-income person residing in Palo Alto, and any age disabled resident. There's either a 25 or 50% discount off of your program registration depending on your income level. And for the majority of the participants, there's a $300 subsidy cap per year per qualifying person. This year, as we've just rolled out the low-income adult program access, we have capped the subsidy to $150 to start. This will give us an opportunity to gauge the level of demand before we kind of increase the subsidy up to what it is for the other participants. And then finally, these are just this is a little bit about the actual municipal fee changes effective fiscal year 19. So typically, city staff will determine how much salaries and benefits are increasing across the city and give each department guidance to increase fees to kind of correspond to that increase in cost to provide services. This year, that was 2.6%. So the average salary and benefit rate for city employees is going up by 2.6%. Therefore, in general, fees should go up by 2.6%. And the idea there is that you maintain the cost recovery level by increasing the fee at that rate. So that is the increase that we applied to many of the community services departments' fees, but not all. There were some larger increases, including on community garden plots across at the golf course and in the middle school athletics program areas, for example. With the community garden plots, we have not raised the fees in quite some time. It's going up almost 7%, but that is from 75 cents per square foot to 80 cents, so it's relatively hard to do 2.6% and still have a whole number. We did that because primarily due to increasing potable water costs. The golf fees, as you know, we have a whole new operator with kind of new expectations, which is why golf is changing so much. And middle school athletics also was a program area that had not had fees raised in more than 5 years and was starting to see diminishing cost recovery levels. And finally, we have added a new corporate facility rental fee. So This was in response to feedback from the public, City Council, and this commission to make sure that largely private benefit events that are kind of occupying our facilities are paying more for that privilege. So we've set up a new fee that would provide for a $4,000 to $8,000 corporate facility rental fee on top of our normal facility rental fees for users who want to book large amounts of space for extended periods of time at our facilities. So that is everything about municipal fees. And I was going to
Can
say
I
we
ask
could.
one question?
Yeah, I'll pause.
If it's not long-term, if some corporation wants to have a Christmas party and rent out Lucy Stern, there's no additional fees?
No, that is not, that would not be something where this fee actually sets in. And I do have, it is use of at least 10,000 square feet with at least 1,000 people attending and over several days.
Okay,
So it really, yeah, it's pretty narrow.
that makes sense. They're impinging on other people's project, where if someone's just renting one room, they're not really impinging on the public.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Don's asked me to entertain or allow questions from the rest of the commission. Jeff, do you have questions, comments? Ann?
Thank you. I had one about the middle school athletic programs. So we haven't raised the fees for 5 years. And then will you be watching the participation numbers to see if they stay the same or go up or down? I'm just concerned about middle school athletics because I believe that the city runs that whole program, right?
Yeah.
And so what about the kids that can't afford to play?
Yes, well, hopefully they would take advantage of the fee reduction program, which this would cover. But yes, we're always monitoring for dips in enrollment or increases, and taking a look at our total revenue. So one thing I didn't mention, but is extremely important in our department, is that we're market-driven, essentially, even middle school athletics. So we don't have we can't do the same type of evaluation of our fees that the development center is looking at, or the police department, right, where people don't really have a choice but to pay that fee. And so, yeah, that's why we don't always follow the guidance that City Hall gives of increasing fees at a certain percentage without other consideration. But this fee, we've already started to kind of get the word out in the middle schools.
Thank you.
Where do our fee dollars go? Do they stay with the division?
No, they go into the city's general fund.
So how many, what general portion of the fees going to the general fund are generated by the Community Services Division?
The Community Services Department recovers about, overall, if you just look at our revenues in versus total expense, we cover about 30% of our cost. So that would be around $10 million in this upcoming fiscal year.
Do you have a sense for what that is relative to the city more broadly?
I think I could safely say we have to be a drop in the bucket compared to, fees associated with development.
Yeah, sure.
For example.
That's kind of the unique.
Yeah,
Right.
But if you're looking at other departments that are general funded, we're recovering a very high percentage through user fees.
David?
I have two questions. I'm pretty sensitive to resident versus non-resident, but you have a difficult job in that you want to service the residents, and the people who are giving you budget are expecting you to support residents primarily. But in some cases, you wouldn't even have a class if you didn't have a certain number of slots filled, and it's okay to have non-residents in order to pay the salary of the teacher or the camp counselor, whatever. So you've got this delicate balancing act. How sophisticated is that? Do you have dynamic pricing or things like that? Do you identify classes and camps that are in great demand by residents, and some that are marginal and should have non-residents?
Yeah, I think the most effective way for us to make sure that residents are getting access to these really in-demand programs is by giving them the opportunity to register before non-residents. And we do that right now through when you register for a class or a camp. Non-residents have to wait. Typically, it's they don't. The first week of registration is only available for residents, and actually, it's the first month or so for our camp registration. So we really try to encourage residents to sign up early so that they can fill up, as many slots as are in demand by residents. And then when we see that we still have, for example, 5 out of 20 slots available for a particular class, non-residents have the opportunity to fill up those remaining open seats.
And so if you find that that a class is pretty full and you've covered costs, can you get away with charging more to non-residents? Because you really don't need them to fill in for some classes, you really don't need them. And so if they really, really want to get in, could you charge more than the 15%? Because in my mind, the 15% seems pretty low for some classes that are very in demand.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and we have looked at increasing our non-resident premium to be as high as 25%, for example. And that is something we could look at is kind of having a range rather than just a flat 15%. We could encourage our staff when they're looking at setting prices to say, hey, on those programs that have a really high demand, let's see what happens if we go up to 20 or 25% premium. We do have to be careful always that we're not setting the price so high that non-residents will just choose not to sign up at all. So that's the hard piece.
That was my point. If we don't need them, then we don't really care.
Yeah. But
you're right, that's bad publicity, or it could come back to bite you later. That leads me to the second question, and that is with the rent so high, many people who have a decent income may not, it may go all to rent. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, they will need more help than that same income at another city like South San Jose. And so how do you deal with that? How many slots do you give? Do you have a set number of slots that you give to low income or not?
No, it could, theoretically, we could have a class that's completely filled with low-income residents because we're not restricting access. If someone qualifies for the fee reduction program, they just, kind of fill out the form and come into a community center to register for a camp just the way that any other resident would. So there isn't any kind of limitation on how many low-income or disabled residents could participate in a program. It is always, I think, something that's nice about our cost recovery policy is that for the most part, our camps and classes are not expected to fully recover costs, so we can try to keep our prices relatively low for all of our users, which, you know, our goal is to get more people in our programs, so.
So I just want to make sure that when you have your budget cuts and when you have to go before the city council, that they understand that we're providing these incredible services to a large low-income population, even residents.
Yes, we will be fighting to keep all of our programs and services intact as much as we possibly can.
Are there any other questions on that, Jeff?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. In the finer print, there was reference to different fee schedules for different types of groups, and there was one of the groups that was highlighted was the, quote, friends groups. I'm wondering, how many of these friends groups are there? We've heard about one that's not so well known today already. I'm wondering what else we might learn. And there are a dozen friends groups. Are there?
No, and just to so I think what you're referring to is actually in the Community Services Department's response to the auditor's report, or I might be getting it confused, but we do have one of the things that the auditor asked us to do was really make sure that any exception to the table that you saw that said, you know, here are our target cost recovery levels for different types of things be called out. So what they were talking about specifically was that participants in the children's theater shows do not pay any fee to be there as performers. And it's the Friends of the Children's Theater actually pays to cover the cost of the participants. So they collect donations that they then kind of remit revenue to the city, or not revenue, a gift to the city of that donation to kind of cover the costs associated with having those children participate. And so that's kind of in the fine print because the auditor identified that as being something like a class or camp, and really pushed that we would charge children to participate. And so that's one of the things that we kind of called out is if we're going to have a group, like a friends group, donate money in lieu of charging a fee, we think that's an acceptable way to, we think that's acceptable to kind of not charge the fee in that case.
Well, maybe I misunderstood it. I thought it was more talking about nonprofits or friendly type groups with lower fee rates as opposed to for-profit or out-of-city groups. So I was just wondering.
Yeah.
And maybe Darren or Kristen can answer the question. What are the friends groups that the city is benefiting from?
So, it says in the Community Services Department fees slide for the low recovery.
Yes.
It's a low recovery if friends participate. I would like to maybe not pursue the specific answer right now, but what I've just heard is that there's a $29 million budget, but that we pay for 10 million of that ourselves, and so that's money that may go into the general fund, but then comes back out of the general fund. So it's really a $19 million budget. Mm-hmm. But then of that $19 million, I'd be really interested in understanding relative to Jeff's questions, and maybe we get a more detailed answer. How much of that, is it $1 million that the collective friends provide for that, or is it $500,000, or is it $20,000, or what is it that offsets the $19 million, or is the budget actually bigger than $19 million because that funding isn't visible?
Right.
And then I'd be interested in how much, you've got these categories consistent with what Jeff's asking of low, medium, and high, I'd be interested in how many programs are in the high, medium, and low recovery. And I wasn't going to say this now, but I'll say it later. I'm disappointed with the policy that there's not a fourth category, which maybe be the golf course eventually. And I understand they're in startup mode. It would be the fourth category is 100%, not 75% or 95%. The goal ought to be 100%, and that ought to be a category that's called out here. But I think that goes to Ryan's question of maybe a little more detail, and I'm not sure I've given you enough, but I think in general we'd like a little more granularity. Is that fair from everybody? Sure. And maybe I could sit with you, Jasmine, and we could work up some granularity that we bring back.
That would be great, because actually I do have to give a little nod to Kristen. She and I actually have a lot of the answers to some of these questions. We've, prepped for any question that could possibly come up in front of City Council over the last several months. So I think we certainly can come up with the answers and report back to this group, kind of going through all of those. So it might be helpful to sit down and really flesh out exactly what would be the most helpful thing.
I would vote in favor of a written response with more granularity rather than trying to answer the questions tonight, but I'm willing to, is everybody agreeable to that?
That's fine.
Is that okay? Kristen, do you have a comment on that? Are we crazy?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess just for process, you want a written response to your questions here tonight? Or?
I think collectively, between what Ryan's asked and Jeff's asked and some other stuff, there's a theme of the kind of question, and maybe I could sit with Jasmine and help collect that theme, and maybe we could come up with a collective answer.
Okay.
Or she can come up with the answer, but I could help collect the question.
Yeah, but how do you disseminate that? Do you have to disseminate that in the next meeting, or do you do it privately outside of the meeting?
I think as long as it's from the staff to the commission, they can do that with a simple.
Yeah, and what we might do is that include it in the packet so that anyone who might be watching this meeting or interested in some of those answers would have those answers as well.
Right. So if we can disseminate it before, but include it officially in the next meeting, so it's publicly available. Is that fair? Is that correct?
That is fair, and just a reminder that
yes,
no conversations, serial conversations on the topic.
Yeah, no, I wasn't proposing
like
that at all. In fact, that's what I was trying to avoid.
And I have another question if we're ready to move on. I'm glad to see that we've added a corporate facility rental fee. Certainly there was call for that. I'm curious how the 4 to 8K per day rate was decided upon.
There was a huge range in what's charged when we looked at other cities, as low as $0 or $1,000 or $2,000, as high as sometimes in the millions, especially in San Francisco. So we kind of tried to set something that, in general, we try to set a fee relatively low initially and sort of see what the reaction is and then raise it. So this was towards the middle of the range, a little bit on the lower side, so that we can raise it if necessary.
Thank you. I would encourage and request you in the future to engage with the Parks and Facility Use Policy ad hoc. We're here and we'd like to help when we can. Thank you.
Agreed.
I have one other. Oh, I'm sorry, Keith.
Go ahead.
So this is a little bit tangential, but do you, I should say, perceive the opportunity to increase revenues from rental fees at Lucy Stern, or
could you move closer?
do you perceive an opportunity to increase rental fees at Lucy Stern or other facilities?
Yes, the short answer is yes, but not yet, mainly because of the construction at the Junior Museum. But yes, we have a lot of demand for our weddings there. And once we have a parking lot again, I think we'll be able to increase the fees and still maintain a lot of happy customers.
And do you do any marketing around availability of those spaces?
We do, and we would like to do more. So it's something that I'm hoping we'll be able to build up in the 2 years that the Junior Museum is under construction.
So I'll add to that. One of the ways that we advertise, especially Lucy Stern, because that's our main location for weddings, is through sort of wedding websites like The Knot and I know it's been a long time, so whatever the other one is, but it's listed as a facility, and so people hear about it that way.
Like Gamble Garden.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another one. So people who are getting married can go on a website and look at all the possible venues in the Bay Area to get married, and Lucy Stern Community Center comes up as one of them.
So our fees now, none of them are controlled by Prop 29?
No.
So we can charge whatever we want?
Yes.
So cost recovery isn't mandatory, it's just a tool that we use for helping us determine the right price?
Yes.
And so how do we set the price? Do we look at the market price and say, what will the market bear? Or do we just look at our costs and say, we mark up our cost by 10, 15%, and then that's it?
It's generally both of those things, because if we're going to have a new program, we need to make sure that we can recover kind of a reasonable amount of cost. If the market is really low, but it's a very expensive program, that might not be something that we can afford to fund. So we really need to look at both of those things. Our staff that are setting fees, they're generally very in tune with what the market will bear. They're very specific. They have specific knowledge. For example, Junior Museum staff setting the fees for camps can tell you the fees that every other science camp is charging in the region. And so they're really keeping that in mind. And we're also constantly looking at the total cost to make sure that it makes sense to keep doing the program the way we're doing it.
And do we also adjust the cost based on how well did we fill up the class last year? If it filled up right away, do we consider raising the price?
Yes, we do. That does happen. And conversely, if it's not filling up, that's a reason to consider adjusting the price, adjusting the schedule, all kinds of things.
Okay. We talked, in the packet, it talked about direct cost. How do you calculate direct cost? Is that just the labor of the person who's teaching the course, or is there, you go ahead and tell me that.
Yeah, so the direct cost, each of our programs is in its own cost center in SAP, so it has its own special code, and it includes the salaries and benefits that are associated with staff that are providing those services, but also any other costs, non-salaried costs like supplies. That's what the direct cost is, and then we determine what the city, essentially the city overhead rate is, and the department's administrative costs, and dole that out as a percentage to apply for the indirect cost.
And that it was what, 15% for the department and 20% for the city?
Yeah.
How do we come up with that number?
The city one is just what we kind of get billed, that we can see, these indirect charges that are generally they're tacked on to just the Community Services Administration cost center.
Oh, so the city puts a tax on
The city does it, yeah.
Okay, so you look at that tax then.
Right.
But how does maintenance come into this?
So maintenance is generally is indirect cost from Public Works. So we can see that line item added to our department.
And so if you have a class that's being held out on a grassy field, or one that's inside a building or at the aquatic center, those have vastly different maintenance requirements, but yet we still charge 15 and 20%.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of, I guess, practicality, just to try to come up with a number without spending too much time figuring out what it should be for aquatics versus
Yeah.
the
Well,
art center.
back in the days when Prop 29, then that really was important to get all that, because you were limited by Prop 29, which meant that if you understated your costs, your hands were tied, right? So you definitely didn't want to understate your costs, because that overly burdened your
That's true.
flexibility.
And so actually, we're the only department, possibly the library, also is not subject to Prop 29, but the other departments are, and they've actually paid for consulting studies and things to make sure that they get it really right. But our department was left out of that to save money because it's not subject to the same restrictions.
Because one of my problems is that if we're just going for this target of 100% or 115 or 135, depending which category you're in, and we still are understating our costs, we don't pay rent on that, it's just the labor that it costs. Should we be raising our rates and trying to make money on some of those to pay for other classes where they may not be as popular, but we still want to hold them because of the community good? Right, you have the categories of the community good, and we really want to make sure that we get those community good classes in. But the ones that are just personal good, we really should be trying to make a profit on it. And right now, our target is 135, and our cost is, in fact, more than 135. We're still losing on that category where it's just personal benefit.
So the city's policy does have in the high cost recovery range a cap at 100%, but that's not how we do it in our department. So golf course, yes, we aim to more than recover the cost for the golf course. When people book a wedding with us, when they're hired, taking personal vocal lessons, we're trying to charge as much as we can, and those are dictated by what the market will bear, and not based on what we want to know what the cost recovery level is, but those are things where we're just charging the market rate.
So you're saying right now the cost recovery kind of is trivial?
In those cases where we're aiming to get beyond 100%, then yeah, it's the main thing we're looking at in those is the market rate.
And so that last category that had a target of 135, what do we get in that target, or in that category? Are we getting 135 or are we getting 150?
It would depend on each specific thing that you're talking about in that category. And I guess that would be something I would say perhaps I should come back with some specific answers on some of these things, like such as the golf course. The things that kind of pop to mind are golf course, facility rentals for private events, singing lessons. We have the private swimming lessons. Those are the main things I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, because I think even that group, if we're just targeting 135, we are not soaking them. We are still subsidizing them because we're giving them free rent. They're using our facilities. All they are paying for is the labor and then the tax on top of that labor. So they still are being subsidized. So I would encourage us on that last category to try to make more money, because especially with these budget cuts coming up, we're going to lose the ability to have that best category. And I think we really have to protect that, and one way to protect that is to charge more in that higher category. Okay, thank you.
All right, should we move on to the
I think we
capital?
can,
All right, thank you.
I'll look forward to a conversation where we can maybe come up with something that we can bring back in a reasonable fashion that becomes public as well.
Sounds good.
So we move on to the capital improvement projects there.
Thank you. I'll briefly provide some background information on our capital budget process, and mainly focusing on our CSD projects in particular. Thanks. So let's start with what we mean by CIP. It's helpful to have a little definition. The criteria on this slide right here lists that the minimum cost has to be $50,000. If it's below that amount, we're typically asked to fund it through our operating budget or perhaps through, and I'll show you a little later on, some of our CIPs that are ongoing and annual, and sometimes those are used to fund smaller one-offs. It also has to have a useful life of at least 5 to 7 years or extend an existing asset out to that time frame. I should note the city plans its capital budget in 5-year cycles, with only the first year that's funded, it's done so by council in June. So our current 5-year cycle, and I'm going to explain this over and over because some people get lost with the fiscal year thing, so bear with me. So our current 5-year cycle is now fiscal year 2019 through fiscal year 23, if that makes sense. And only FY19, the one I'll show you in a minute, which projects we have, is the funded ones. And those remaining years are really used for forecasting and planning, and they can be reshuffled each year as we look at it anew. Go ahead, go to the next slide. Just a little bit on the prioritization. Our big funding book, our budget book, it's a really cool tool. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's got a lot of information. One bit about it is on the prioritization, and it mentions council priorities are a big piece. Aligning with the city's infrastructure, our Blue Ribbon Committee Commission, the IBRC, you'll hear it called a lot. This was a community and staff endeavor, I think in 2013. They looked at every bit of infrastructure within the city and analyzed where it fell into these categories of either catch-up, meaning it had been identified before in the previous report as needing attention, and it was not done so in its proper time. So that went into this catch-up bucket, and there was an enormous number of projects that fell into there, and we've been whittling away as we go. It'll come back to that term catch-up, and you'll see it listed in a couple project descriptions. The next category was keep-up, and that intent of that bucket or category of projects are ones that the lifespan's coming due, and to keep up, you're going to have to make sure it happens in a given year. Let's say the lifespan of a playground is 15 years, and it went in a certain year. By 15 years from that date, it's allocated in this IBRC report, the IBRC report, to be done in that year. And if you didn't, it would fall now into catch-up. Does that make sense? You'll see that come back and forth a few times. Other priorities that are often used to prioritize things are health and safety implications, and oftentimes an unforeseen event, neither in our 5-year cycle nor on our list of projects waiting to get into a CIP, might be out there looming that we didn't know about and becomes an issue. And the next opportunity, the next year, it can jump right into the front based on sometimes health and safety. Historical spending and certainty over feasibility, scope, and level of resources. That last bit about, is there a scope? Is there adequate resources? Have you figured out the project? It's a good question. Lots of times we'll have projects in the commission or even the council will say, I really want you to move on this, but there's certain steps that have to be done before we can make it a project. I think the 10.5 acres is a good example of that, where it's just not ready yet to put forth for a CIP. We don't have a scope of work, we haven't done the public outreach, we don't have a conceptual plan, and we haven't answered the land use questions associated with there. It's premature to go forward with the CIP yet, but it'll be coming. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So here is our FY19 projects. Some of them aren't specifically for CSD, but it's in this funding cycle. The one I wanted to point out is the Highway 101 pedestrian bridge. It's a large project. It really isn't driven by CSD, but certainly connected to us. Once it's done, you'll have a connection to the Baylands that's vastly improved. We've been involved since the beginning, both in the design, somewhat in the public outreach process, and in the end, we'll be maintaining an element of the bridge itself. That is the landscaping and some of the irrigation on either side. So the FY19 projects here, these are approximately $19 million that you see just in that FY19 category. As I mentioned, some of them are kind of one-offs that are rather exceptional. The $13 million for that bridge is not typical, and again, not exclusively CSD, but $19 million for FY19, and that doesn't include the reoccurring projects that I'll show you on my next slide, which account for about $1 million annually. On this slide, I've also included, as you can see, various funding sources. So we've got general fund that you see, Coverly Fund, and the Park Development Impact Fee Fund. The general fund's this catch-all for non-designated funds. That is, there's no strings attached, and it can be used. There's no specific intended use. That's funding most of our projects. The Coverly Fund, obviously, is for Coverly ones, and this is, we pay into this. Kristen had shared with me that the new Coverly lease includes how much the city should put in, and it's approximately $1.8 million a year connected with that lease that we put to this fund. It could be used for improvements at Coverly. An example of that will be the Coverly synthetic turf fields and track improvements coming up relatively soon. The Park Development Impact Fees, I know you've heard about that a lot, and that also funds projects like the dog park or our park restrooms, and that's new amenities, non-maintenance oriented. So that's an example of those three funding types. So we can go to the next slide. So here's our reoccurring CIPs, and these are really valuable to staff. The first one is a good example, the benches, signs, fencing. It's got a very long name because it's really intentionally broad. It allows me to use it to supplant other CIPs that maybe are underfunded. If it doesn't have enough to pay for the benches or maybe some fencing, sometimes if I've got enough funding in that one, I could help that CIP out, make it a little more robust, a little more of a complete project. It's also used everywhere. So it's used in every park and open space, sometimes even in around Stern community centers, we would use some of that. The off-road...
That includes both repairs and also new benches, for example?
Yes, it does. The off-road pathway is for our paved bike paths. This is often rolled over, and sometimes you'll see, when we get to the individual project page, you'll see a given year that's much higher than another. It's kind of confusing, why did that happen? Oftentimes it's because we intentionally saved up the money and rolled it over to the next year, allow us to do a cost savings and do a bigger project. And sometimes it's even a couple years because we try to time it with a public works project where they have a big paving contract and we can tie in, have an economy of scale where we save. The open space trails and amenities, some of these seem a little redundant. You'll hear trails maybe a couple times. They each have their own specialized use. Sometimes there is a little overlap and flexibility, usually to our benefit. That particular one funds our trail contract, where all our open space trails are groomed and maintained through that CIP. It funds the contract. Our Parks Emergency Open Space Repairs Project is an important one, often underfunded. We requested to have it increased, and it will in future years. It goes towards, obviously, the unforeseen emergency work, which is often things like an arson fire that took out a playground at Hoover. That was about 8 years ago, but often weather-related or just unforeseen. But what we typically use it for is assets that have prematurely aged, like a surfacing for a playground. So you'll put in the rather expensive pour-and-play rubber around the playground, and the high-use areas fail early, especially at places like Magical Bridge Playground. Vastly premature aging, no mechanism to fund that. And so often that's one I'm heavily reliant on. It's also really important to extend the life of an asset. When we look at certain things, the boardwalk was a good example at the Baylands. We talked about, had we funded it more often, repairs, would it have gone to complete failure, or could we have extended the life? That one's maybe a little more difficult one because the repairs are more onerous, but some of these things, the answer is yes. I can extend the life of a given asset if I can take care of it more frequently, and this kind of CIP helps me do so. Lastly, the open space lakes and ponds. That one's used primarily at Foothills Park for the cattail and pondweed that is annually cleared out, and also at the Baylands Duck Pond, where we occasionally do treatments for the aeration down there. Next slide. So here's a project page and this big capital book, and if you went online and looked at it, every single project has a page like this. And aside from the obvious stuff about description and justification and funding schedule, it also has information. If you look on there, it'll tell you it's a keep-up or catch-up project, like this particular one is a catch-up. It'll also, which means it was identified by the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Committee. Some of the project pages, you'll notice the funding is spread out over multiple years. It doesn't always give you all the details or explain why that is. Most frequently, especially if the project is somewhere in that 300,000 or up range, it's a design element in the previous year. It's usually somewhere between 10 to 20%. And then the next year, which is the bulk of the money, is the construction, although not always. And when we look at obviously the ongoing one, is you'll see every year populated throughout the 5-year cycle. But sometimes they can be confusing. There's a lot of guide in this document, the online document for our capital budget. This next slide, I'm sorry, this is the second page of that one, which has a little bit more detail, just to give you more guidance on the project itself. Go to the next slide, please. So here's our CIP identified needs that are currently not in the capital 5-year plan. And some of them you're familiar with. We talked a little bit about the 10.5 acres being one of them, mainly because it's not ready for that. We have our own CIP for the outreach and planning process, which will start this fiscal year. And then once we've got a plan, the idea would be to populate that somewhere into that 5-year cycle, which is certainly a step that the commission would weigh in on and play a part of. Some of the other projects ideally would have been a project. We would have had them happen already. In fact, for my own personal opinion, I would list them as catch-up. A good example of that would be the Foothills Park restrooms. They're in bad shape, and we wrestled. There's only finite funds, and we had to kind of pick and choose. The other piece to that is, even if I had the money, which is often a question we get both from commission and council members well, if you had the money, you'd do it. And the answer is probably not. When you look at that FY19 page and the number of staff I have to implement those projects, we are at capacity, to say the least. So we're really pushing it to try to accomplish what we already have on the table. So if you gave me another $500,000 and said, see if you can do these, I could tell you without hesitation, I don't think it's possible given our existing resources. We'll be very hard pressed to do what we already have on our agenda for FY19. And the next page. The timeline process is important. So we typically start this planning process in October or November, and ideally meet with the ad hoc and talk about, because again, we're looking at fresh, and you have an opportunity to take things that aren't even on the 5-year cycle, or maybe not even on our identified list, and say, what about this need? And wrestle with it and see where it should fit in. But really, everything can be reshuffled at that point. We take that information, and come December and January, we're submitting our 5-year budget to the finance department. And every year it seems to be a little different. They're not quite so hard and fast. Sometimes there's some give and take. They'll analyze it and say, sorry, some of these are going to have to go. We'll let you horse trade a little bit. And in prior years, we've had opportunities to meet with the ad hoc commission, because the timeframes are usually short. I'm looking at a couple weeks to say, okay, we want to keep that one. We'll trade you, and we'll give up this other project. And sometimes that's not on the table at all. There's no dialogue, at least that I was privy to or part of. Finance just had to make some hard decisions and said these ones are out, and made them categorically. Then in April, we go to the Planning and Transportation Commission, and their role in this is to make sure that the capital plan is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. In the past, sometimes a member of the ad hoc or Parks Commission would come to those meetings. I've been to the last 10. I don't think I've ever gotten the chance to say anything. They never had a question for me. I don't think it's the most fruitful discussion for our purposes of which park project is important. That's not the nature of that conversation. It's strictly, does it comply with the comprehensive plan? And so when we do our submittals, you'll see that and in the documents, it'll say, this is connected to goal such and such and policy such and such in the city's comprehensive plan. And most of ours fit very, very well. I've never had a problem with that. But that's part of the process. And then in May, it goes to the Finance Committee, where they discuss and ultimately make their recommendation to council, which makes their decision to fund the capital budget in June. And we met with the ad hoc, and I shared this information with them, and they may have some additional comments, but with that, it ends my presentation and available for questions.
Maybe go down the line. Jeff, do you have any questions?
No.
Keith?
You made that remark that even if you had more money, you don't have the full-time employees to do more work, which is kind of sobering considering that we just put this master plan with a whole bunch of work in it. So that means that if we had any illusions of implementing the master plan, we need to hire people while our budget is being cut.
You know, it's a good question. Kristen and I have talked about this before, as have Public Works, who often helps do the lion's share of capital projects, managing them. They too are at the same level we are. They're constrained and have reached capacity, and it's frustrating. And we talked about, oftentimes we'll hire, El Camino Park is a good example, where we paid a lot of money to have a project manager run that. And even still with that, it required a lot of my personal time. But I half wonder if that isn't part of the solution, is some of these projects, even through the public process, even through the outreach process, is there a way we could hire a consultant on for that project, build it into the CIP cost, whatever it was, let's say it's a new restroom, and they do that. The consultant leads those public meetings, and they come to the commission and make the presentations and the writing staff reports and doing those kind of things. I think it is feasible. There was one example where the environmental volunteers, when they did the Eco Center project, they hired someone really talented, fairly familiar with the city process, and she ran almost all of it herself. And it kind of clued me into maybe that being a viable option in the future if there was funding available and you built it into the CIP.
Okay, thanks.
I'm curious why PTC does the review of the capital plan to ensure that its compatibility with the comprehensive plan. Do you have some understanding why it falls under their purview?
I'm sorry, I don't. I can look into that and see what the history is. It's a good question.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
Darren, I believe that I read somewhere that it's a city charter requirement.
It is.
Does that sound familiar?
It could very well be. One of those things I just took, oh yeah, PTC looks at that, and I didn't ask.
After the comprehensive plan committee, then the PRC has to approve the comprehensive plan. So they're in charge of the comprehensive plan. Ryan, do you have a question, comment?
Yeah, Darren, I'm curious, in the CIP process timeline, would it be beneficial to you if you had the input and perhaps the more formal support of the entire commission on the prioritized list, so that you could actually, use that to hopefully advocate for your own capital projects that you want to push forward in that coming year? So if you actually had a resolution from this group, so if you started that conversation on the CIP process a month earlier, so that you could then have a resolution from this commission that said, here's what we think should be the budgeted priorities on the CIP side for the next year.
Yeah, I had never pursued a resolution, and maybe it's a good conversation for OMB to ask our budget office to say, is this kind of thing appropriate? Would it be helpful? It's certainly helpful for staff, and one of the challenges I've always had was for some reason, and it was always my intent to come to the full commission and have the robust discussions that Keith and I had for so many years, but for some reason the timing was always such that I could not get it to the full commission in the time frame that the OMB, our budget department, wanted it. So it was really helpful having the flexibility of the ad hoc saying, hey, we only have a week. Can you come real quick and spend 2 hours with me going through this? And unfortunately, despite my best intents, didn't get to the full commission. I would like to do that. I think it makes it just more robust, more eyes on that kind of thing to guide staff, really, would be helpful. And I will try to do that. I think I can do better, too. So I'll give it my best shot to make sure this next go-around, it gets a full commission discussion.
Yeah, and totally appreciating that, it comes crunch time,
Yeah.
And it may not be timely in order to have the entire commission weigh in, but I think it might be fruitful or helpful to you. And I think I would encourage you to think about if there's some, mechanism by which this commission could be helpful to helping drive forward the push for those CIP projects.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Ann, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just one or two on the fiscal year 19, the project criteria, there are 2 listings for turf management plans, one on like 3 lines down and one at the bottom. So how are those?
That's because it's really important.
I know it's very important. I thought we were going to get a double shot at it.
I think it was an error, my process.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah, sorry, only one plan.
And then how do you decide which restroom, which park is going to get which restroom and when?
Yeah, good question. I think we'll be starting that with the ad hoc committee. So we'll get the ad hoc who's working on that together, and we look at a lot of samples and make some site visits, have some recommendations, and then we do public meetings for those communities, starting with our most promising one. And if that's the winner and it gets support, I think that's when we pursue. But if the ad hoc or the commission felt differently that we should do multiple community meetings, we could. But my recommendation is we get the ad hoc together and really brainstorm and think it through and make some site visits, utilizing some of staff's experience. I've got field inspectors that spend a lot of time in parks, and they just are constantly hearing from folks. This is an important one. Eleanor Pardee strikes me as one where I've got a park inspector who must have told me 100 times how many times he's heard from people saying, we've got to have a restroom here. I know it's a challenging site, and that one will bear for lots of discussion, both with the ad hoc, the commission, and the community, but it's one good example where I've heard loud and clear from visitors via staff that it's necessary.
And then the Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan, is that the ongoing study, discussion, outreach?
So
is that a
so that
thing?
one, I'm sorry?
I mean, is it something that's getting built, or we're still discussing it? That's the $94,000?
Yeah, it's carryover. So we started that one in FY18 and started the process, but it's not done in FY18. So the project continues in FY19. That's the remaining budget.
David, do you have questions? So, Darren, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think it gets everybody sort of funding and financial juices going. I just have a curiosity. That FY19 list, as you said, is about $19 million. There's about $17.5 million that is in those 2 major projects, which leaves, $2.5 million. There's almost $1.5 million of planning projects in there, and about $900,000 in restroom projects. And then if you go down, and $1 million in the boardwalk replacement, which is sort of in the maintenance category. It was the undone maintenance category, and everything down below is maintenance. So you've got these 3 buckets of restrooms, planning, and maintenance, and that's really what it's all about. Is that a fair characterization? Is that, that's the challenge, not that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that is a fair characterization. A lot of the CIPs, especially as we talked about the ongoing ones, that are used for maintenance. In fact, at one point, I remember we were looking for something similar to benches, signs, and fencing. I forget what the particular thing was, but I had approached OMB to say, hey, we'd like another CIP for this. So we don't do that anymore as CIPs. CIPs should be buildings, infrastructure. What you're talking about is kind of a routine maintenance that should go into operating budget. But operating budgets get touched a lot, and these ongoing projects for me have been stable for the last decade. If anything, they've gone up, and they're really valuable, and I don't want to mess with them. Your point about planning, much to the frustration of a lot of our visitors, park visitors get frustrated with how much money goes towards planning projects. They say to me often, can't staff just do this? Can't you just put together this plan? And sometimes the answer is yes, I think I can. But oftentimes there are members of the community that really appreciate going through the process. That process of outreach and having an independent party do it, it's valuable and important. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. It more than answered the question. Thank you. But it also sort of speaks to what Ryan was talking about in terms of, could the ad hoc help create and analyze these buckets, and then could the whole commission have visibility of some of the variables that, when I look at this, I'm saying, some of these things aren't really variable. For us to spend a lot of time discussing them, you've got a reason you're having to do it. So the amount that's really variable that we can influence and whatnot would seem to be much smaller. So rather than the whole thing, if we're looking at the variable part, maybe the whole commission can get behind what you're trying to do, to speak to Ryan's point. Maybe that helps. Does anybody else have any follow-up questions or whatever? I think this has been very complete.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So are there comments, announcements, follow-ups from the ad hocs that didn't get touched tonight? An awful lot of the ad hocs got touched tonight in one way or another, and from the liaison groups. So I'll start with David.
A question for Darren. We had a discussion in the last meeting about the Renzel Pond and the work that they're doing and how it will influence the Baylands Comprehensive Plan. And I noticed that, and there was some discussion about whether or not there should be an environmental impact study, and I was noticing that there's almost that there's almost no work that's been done since our last meeting, and I was wondering if our discussion had something to do with that.
No, they were on hold until the end of nesting season. Is I think their game plan. And I'll for sure for the next meeting, I'll come with an updated report, or have Karin come, who works in that area of Public Works, and give you a briefing on where they're at. But the intent, as I understand it, is to leave the remaining vegetation there till the end of nesting season, and then they'll continue work.
Okay. Okay.
Is there any other comments or questions or ad hoc or liaison reports? David, you're okay? And we have we had the opportunity, by the way, to have David speak about the hike that he took with the agenda that we had tonight. We decided we didn't have time for that, and next meeting we have more of the Foothills Park on the agenda, and that'd be complementary to that. So we look forward to that next time. David, thank you.
Good.
Ann, do you have anything you want to add?
Quickly, it was good to have the ad hoc before the meeting today, and I think we learned a lot in terms of the Coverly consultants, so that was a really good thing. Nothing about dog parks right at the moment. I'm anxious to have something about dog parks, but nothing.
Although I think that we might have something in terms of restaurants to talk with you about, not too distant future. I think that's part of the dog park and park amenities, really.
That's true,
Yes.
yes. And finally, I'm delighted that we have pickleball in August on the agenda.
In the next meeting.
And we'll need to meet with the ad hoc before that, obviously, so we'll set
It's not on
something
the
up.
agenda?
No, we will, but
is.
it's on for August, but the ad hoc will need to meet with staff before that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff?
Just a quick update on the community gardens. I'll be attending a meeting next week where I mentioned, previously I mentioned that there were a couple of community gardens outreach meetings with the gardeners, and this is going to be a summary meeting where we're looking at rules changes, and that would then eventually come to the commission here.
Keith?
I have a question for Darren. I was up at Foothills Park and bumped into some people from Friends of Foothills Park, another friends group, and they were taking out hemlock there. And I was just chatting with them and asked, what can we do to help you? And their big concern was volunteers. They're a small group, they're getting smaller, and they don't have the connections to get volunteers anymore. And is that something the city can do, or can we coordinate with Grassroots or some other nonprofit? And we heard the same thing out of Jack Morton, his desire for volunteers. There seems to be a common thread here.
Yeah. The Friends of Foothills has dwindled as an organization. In my time with the city, it was more robust. They were really active, and they kind of aged out and have not recruited very well. Most of staff's endeavors to recruit volunteers, I don't think intentionally, but they were sort of funneled towards grassroots, Actera at the time, and now grassroots ecology. They offered just more programs that were more attractive to more people, with more opportunities, and a greater organization. The Friends, while extremely passionate, were just a smaller, I think, less appropriate for your one-off volunteers, or maybe slightly less committed volunteers. Those are hardcore driven folks, and there just seemed to be less of them interested in that kind of work. Still valuable, still supported by staff. We're with them recently working over by the Baronda Lake to remove some lily pad. Someone had dumped an aquarium into the pond at the lake a year ago, and some invasive lily pads were coming up, and they were really helpful along with staff to get it out of there. So we still work with them, and that's a valuable organization. And occasionally they get a new person. Sometimes it's a grassroots ecology person who really wants to take ownership of an area, because they have a lot of autonomy, and they'll cycle over. But by and large, grassroots is our recipient and mover towards volunteerism.
Can we try and integrate them so they can help each other?
They certainly are on elements, but they have somewhat different philosophies and different perspectives. Again, one group is just kind of hardcore, set in their ways. This is the way we want to do restoration, and grassroots is just a little different. So there's certainly a common denominator. They certainly collaborate on some things with staff as kind of the liaison guiding them, but they're definitely two separate entities.
Okay, and so do you think there's a role for the city here, or do we think just let them handle themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've talked to the Rangers for many years about this. This process of kind of fading out is probably, we're in it 10 years. It's been in this slow, steady decline. And as much as possible, when we find someone who's interested in that, because independent of either group, the Rangers will also occasionally lead volunteer projects, and you'll come across someone who's very passionate. And of course, we direct them, when possible, to the Friends, for sure, but also to grassroots, so it's kind of both. So we do support that organization. Do I think it's going to make a huge turnaround? I don't think so. I think it'll probably continue just on a very small scale, is my anticipation. But as much as possible, we will support. And in fact, I just got a long-term, this gentleman's named Bob Roth, really fantastic volunteer. I've worked with him closely for 19 years. And he told me the relationship between staff and the Friends has never been better right now. So I'm really happy to hear that. And our Ranger staff is supportive. It just hasn't equated to growing the group.
Okay. I mean, one possibility is that the commission goes out and spends a morning out with Friends of Alto Parks, or Friends of Foothills Park, rather. If that might be an option.
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to be the liaison, and I need to do that.
Our Friends of Foothills Park?
Yes.
Oh, both of them?
No, just Friends of Foothill Park.
Or Friends of Palo Alto Parks, or Friends of Foothill Park?
Friends of Foothill Park.
Okay.
Well, if I can be of help, let me know, and we'll set you up with a meeting or whatever would be helpful.
Jeff? Yeah, I was at an event at Magical Playground maybe about 2 weeks ago, and received a number of comments about the restrooms there, and it came from parents of special needs children, and some of it was about the fact that now that we have Magical Playground, there's so many more people visiting the park, and so it was some comments about the maintenance and upkeep, but also do we have appropriate number of restrooms. So there was some concern there with just the impact that Magical Playground has had on that park and the unique visitors to that park. Then one question about restrooms is, are the Hoover Park restrooms, do those have hours, or are they ever open, or are those still operational?
Yes, Hoover Park restrooms are automated, and they open at the beginning of the park hours, 8 a.m., and close with closer, which is 10:30. And to your question, or comment rather, on the facilities, the restroom facilities for Magical Bridge over at Mitchell Park, from the very get-go, it was really obvious that now we're underserved in terms of the nearest restroom, which is across the bridge closest to the tennis courts. And we've been brainstorming, do we try to enlarge that one? Do we try to build a new one next to the Magical Bridge Playground? We're not quite sure. It's probably a great one for our ad hoc to discuss. As we say, we've got this pile of money to use in FY19. Is it best served there, or perhaps a site that has no restroom whatsoever? It's a challenging one. The other kind of consideration to take into account is as new universally accessible playgrounds come online, and there are a number, as you probably know, both north and south of us, in the near future, it's going to reduce, at least I'm hearing this from Olinka, who's kind of the head of that organization, reduce some of the load that we bear. And will those reduced numbers maybe allow that existing restroom to suffice? I'm not quite sure, but it bears thinking it through as we ponder where that next restroom should be.
Just one comment about that Magical Bridge playground, and there's no water or facilities over on the other side of the bridge today. And so to put a bathroom over there, you might need to bring water while you're doing the bridge redo. And otherwise, you have to do you have to update the bathrooms on the other side of the bridge.
I'll certainly look into that. I think it's entirely possible to get potable water to the other side and do that, even if it was post new bridge in place.
Okay.
I think it's doable.
So I will add one comment on Friends of the Palo Alto Parks. Kristen and I have met with them, had some discussions. I've subsequently taken Roger Smith's daughter, who's also on their board, to meet with environmental volunteer people to try and create a triangle there that might help us. The result of that is that Elliot Wright is actually, I think, securing a major portion of the funding that the Friends of the Palo Alto Park is committed to. So that's not a done deal yet, but it's pretty close to that. So we may have that signage funding, but in a roundabout way that worked in terms of creating these partnerships that we've been talking about. And it almost makes me think that it would be really interesting to try and get a lot of these friends in a room and have a conversation about who has what strengths and what kind of policies are they using and practices are they using and what kind of funding. And because the other thing that I didn't say when Morton was here was, the challenge is that everybody's competing for the same dollars. When you're talking about the EV versus the Audubon versus Actera or whatever, everybody's out trying to get the same dollar. And if there's a way to divide that strategy up, I think that could make an awful lot of sense. So the last thing here, I guess, is the agenda for August. Kristen, do you have comments on that? It's in front of us.
I do. There's a lot on there. I have it up on the screen. So we'll do a pickleball tennis update for sure. The Foothills Park Trail reroute project, amendments to the park rules and regulations. It's just sort of cleaning that document up. An update on the golf course, and then Commissioner Moss was going to give a presentation on his hike from Palo Alto to the sea. So if we feel like that's too long, we can move some of it around to September.
I was thinking of adding to it.
Sure.
Well, we did raise with Jasmine the question of an update, and if we're going to have an update, then we should make it public, I guess. So maybe we should just simply have on the agenda it was the operating budget update. And if we could add that as a 10-minute item that could be distributed, maybe that would work. Anything else that people would like to see on there?
This isn't for August, but it just seems to me that we're not making the progress with the master plan that I would like. Do other people have that same feeling? And would it be appropriate to cancel one of these fall meetings and have a retreat where we can talk just how can we get more traction with the master plan.
I think that I think we should absolutely discuss that. I think the September meeting, once you start talking October, November, now you're into the kind of timing that Darren was talking about, and we may need and want those meetings. But I think the possibility of a September meeting that was somehow a retreat, somehow let's discuss what's happening. Are we spinning wheels? What are we stuck by and whatnot? Maybe we could do something like that. Maybe we could help staff. What I don't want to do is make this a whole big another burden for staff to create a big off-site meeting. Maybe somehow we set up an ad hoc that helps create that or something.
Well, one thing that I've been working on is providing it's more like a report on what has been accomplished in the master plan, because I think there's a lot that we're doing that is in the master plan. It may not be the big new thing, but the dog park was one of them. And so I think maybe if we start there, what have we actually accomplished and what is set to be accomplished in the next year, that might be a good starting point.
Well, what did, with the results of the polling that came back, what did the council decide to do, or what's happening with any sort of bond measures to the ballot for anything? Has there been any movement on that or decisions in regards to that?
Go back and look at the last council meeting where they discussed that, because I'm not positive, and council's on break right now, so nothing's happening on that. But I do believe it's coming back up, so I'll get back to you for certain on that.
The Palo Alto Park Master Plan, you have $19 million worth of CIP projects for 2019, and we really ought to highlight all the things in the master plan that are being accomplished by each of those items. To say that we're not doing anything toward the master plan would be false. They're providing a tremendous amount of traction for the master plan, and it would behoove us, when you go before the CIP whatever committee, that you specify, here's all the things in the master plan that this particular line item is accomplishing. And not only that, but there are some that are not being funded. Well, wait, before I go to that, there's maintenance stuff that's also in the master plan, and they should be highlighted. And then there's the things that are not funded, 7.7 acres, 10.5 acres, that are mentioned in the master plan. And we said that they would get done in the next 10 to 20 years. They don't have to be done tomorrow, but it would be nice to highlight, maybe prioritize those things that are not funded based on the parks and master plan items that they refer to. Do you need some help from an ad hoc committee or somebody to go through that effort?
Well, what I plan to do is come back in, I think it might have to be September, with a report on what's been accomplished in the master plan. This is parks, this is recreation, both pieces, and parks would include CIPs, assuming they're in the master plan. And then also provide a report on what we plan to accomplish in fiscal year 19.
Yeah, I actually think that, Keith, there's certainly always more to be done, but I think that there's been some significant progress. So having that, cataloging of the progress, I think will be helpful. I know that, Dawn, you've worked on this in the past as well, but I think that would be a great thing. And I actually don't know that we would need an entire meeting. I think it is an agenda item, but I don't think it's necessarily something that may necessitate a retreat. I don't know. But perhaps we just kind of see what Kristen comes up with in terms of her work product, and we plan from there.
That would be my recommendation, is let's in September have Kristen come back, and then if that causes us to create an ad hoc to pursue it, or to have a retreat or something that we can have a different kind of discussion, then we can do that. But I think if we let Kristen come back with that kind of result, because as you think about what we've gone through in the last few years, all of a sudden we've got a golf course, all of a sudden we've got a dog park, all of a sudden, you know, we've got some things that are done. But last year we were making a bunch of decisions. You know, we were putting recommendations forward to council. We haven't done that this year, but we have celebrated some completion of projects, and there's some sort of magic cycle that maybe we don't quite understand the movement of the planets around the sun or something that's going on here. But I think maybe Kristen understands that and can give us some insight into that. That would be great. So I think, Jeff?
A concern I have, and maybe it's touching on what Keith's feeling as well, it feels like there isn't so much in the pipeline right now, as far as what's coming to the commission and how we're being used. And yes, we are making accomplishments. It's a cyclical nature, and we're getting completion of the golf course, we're getting completion of dog parks, we have some successes to celebrate. I think it's the process and what's coming up next, and perhaps some of it is communication with what's being expressed to the commission is part of it as well.
I think part of my observation on that is, when you look at the CIP list and you take out the bridge and you take out the JMZ, I go back to there's $1.5 million worth of planning. And so we're getting to participate and hear discussions of lots of planning, but the planning isn't resulting in, so here's the conclusion, now act on it. Hopefully we're influencing, even with just the questions tonight, I hope we've influenced and made progress on that. But I think Jeff's point is a good one. So we need to, where are things in the orbit? Where are things? And are there enough things at the right place in the orbit? And I think that's your point. So let's see if we can look at that.
Looking at the Baylands Comprehensive Plan and the Coverly Master Plan, we're at a certain stage, early stage in projects that will take 5 years to complete. So again, we're at a certain stage in that, but it's not a very exciting, well, it is exciting to stage, but you won't see results for quite a while.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason for anybody to be embarrassed about what we're doing or not doing. I think that the whole range of things that we have exposure to, I think one of the biggest things we need to worry about right now is the funding and the various friends organizations and their ability to get volunteers. I think funding and volunteers, whether the commission can help with that or not is unclear, but we need to be participating in that discussion, because that's one of the things that's holding back what's happening in our community, if we can come back to that expression. So are we okay? Is everybody okay with that?
Back to the agenda, I would like to consider having some discussion on placement of solar panels. I don't know if we can, if this is going to fit in the August agenda, but picking up on the discussion at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes, in fact, I wrote that down and didn't come back to it.
If we can't get it in, I mean, it is kind of a timely issue right now with it just happening, and I'm not sure what else is in progress that we might have an opportunity to influence. But if we can't get it in August, let's at least get it penciled in for September, please.
Yep, that's fair.
I had a couple of questions concerning the August agenda. Darren, do you think that it would be possible to discuss the 7.7 acres at the August meeting and kind of what you're planning to do in terms of public outreach? And
Yeah, I think that's fair. It'll be, my hunch is it'll be the very end of August, but most likely early September that we open the site. But it's no reason why we can't discuss our concepts and ideas.
Yeah, so I appreciate that the August agenda is already fairly full, but If you think it would dovetail nicely with the other foothills update you're doing, that might work well. And then on the amendments to the park rules, you said that these are cleanup items. Is there an ad hoc that's working on this, or what's
No,
the-
that's a good question. We've, it's typical that these get updated every 3 to 5 years. We just go through and say, you know what, this rule's changed. For example, the dog on leash rule doesn't have one that says it can only be 6 feet, something like that. We need it, we're absent, every other municipality has something comparable, why don't we want to change that rule or regulation. And enough have accumulated, we've got a decent number, and if there's an ad hoc or you want to choose to form one to help review those, I haven't done that in the past. We typically just bring it to the full commission, but I'd welcome an ad hoc to discuss it in advance if that's what the commission would like, or I could just bring the whole thing to the commission. Whatever your preference is great with me.
Maybe we need a little bit more information on what the detail is, but does it fall under the park and facility use policy ad hoc, or if it's rules at dog parks, maybe not so much. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I could see it being its own thing, its own.
Well, at one point, we decided not to have a 7.7 acre ad hoc, but maybe we need to constitute one.
We have a foothills park.
We have a Foothills Park one.
And 7.7 acres is part of that.
Okay, so as long as we're considering it as part of that, as opposed to a separate.
Yeah, no, I was wondering specifically about the park rules amendments, whether it might benefit this group from, if there were a subset of us, a committee, that was willing to work with Darren on those revisions before it comes to the entire group. And Darren, tell us if you think that the revisions are going to be so kind of minor that that's not going to be helpful, it would just be kind of a waste of time, then that's fine too. But
Yeah, since we haven't done it in so long, I don't think, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2, I don't think we've discussed the rules and regs with the commission at all, in which case maybe it is worth having an ad hoc and we can go through it, because there might not be a lot of familiarity with the rules themselves, so we could talk through it and see what makes sense. I'd be glad to work with an ad hoc on that, even if it meant deferring it a month or so we have time to go through.
yeah, if it's not a time-sensitive amendment that you need to make, then I would suggest that we do an ad hoc.
I think I've received feedback that some commissioners don't like the meeting to go this late, so I feel like we're going to have to split up some of the things on the August agenda anyways, so that might be one of them.
And the one thing we could do, because it's late, is would there be volunteers for a park rules amendments ad hoc?
And Chair, may I add, could we, if this is to be an ongoing one, perhaps we could include the municipal code. We have Title 22 of the municipal code that pertains to parks and open space, and that way it's just a little broader in case we want to look at that later.
So I'm just going to ask if there are volunteers, so I'll put Ryan down, and
I'd be interested.
I was just going to take who the I wasn't going to pick the commission or the ad hoc right now, just say who would be willing, and then maybe we can meet with staff and say, okay, here's the people who have done it. I'm going to leave it at Ryan and Jeff right now. And I'm going to, number 1, say I think we've covered everything unless anybody's got anything burning.
Was it Commissioner Greenfield or Commissioner Lemire? When you said Jeff, which Jeff? Greenfield. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, yes. Then I'm going to ask for a motion for adjournment.
I so move.
Second? In favor?
Aye.
And I would like to thank everybody for being patient and being here. And I would particularly like to thank staff for being here, and Monique, thank you for persevering with us as well.